We're back with another scintillating and completely not fun episode of the Four Horsemen because, as you may notice, there are only three horsemen, and that's because this topic is the one that many, many people will not touch at all. And in fact, in some ways, it's irresponsible for us to even try and ask them to be on the show because it may affect their careers in ways that other people may not understand. And that is, of course, the eternal question. What have the Saudis been up to lately? Because now we had a very interesting new announcement from Riot that they're bringing back all their games to the Esports World Cup. Now, Valorant and TFT weren't there last year, but of course they've decided to add those. And they've decided to add advertisements to their Valorant and League of Legends and TFT circuits. So they've actually sold a sponsorship for the Esports World Cup, which is, by the way, exactly the same thing as the Neom deal that everybody boycotted a few years ago in 2020. Yep. So there's no substantive difference between these things, but now there's just no outrage because the Saudis have effectively normalized their behavior. But underneath, and when you start to pull back the curtain, what's been going on is that the Saudi Arabian government, now, you would have been told by the teams last year, by Riot, by other people, that the Saudi government was getting more progressive. Well, let's check in on that and see if that's actually true. It's actually not. They're worse, if anything, than they were before because it's almost like this sports washing PR exercise is a veil to cover up their heinous human rights abuses. And it's not actually changing their take on human rights. It is more the distraction, the dance of the seven veils as to what is actually going on. And here we are with a lot of information, most of it very unpleasant to share with you about what the Saudi Arabian regime has actually been up to and what changes they have not made and how many of these human rights violations have gotten worse, as well as talking about what Riot is doing, how they've been duplicitous, how they've been sending people to Saudi Arabia in order to make these deals and meet with them, despite allegedly being hands off in this whole affair. It is gross, and it's not just Riot, obviously. It's Activision Blizzard / Microsoft now who's involved. It's Valve that's involved. It's Epic that's involved. It's other developers that are getting involved in this. It's the teams, and it's everybody who's complicit in this entire sordid affair, and it is very gross.
Technically, there is one party that sometimes are hands off, but we'll get to the penal code that they've drafted later. There you go.
Oh, that's a good one. That's some of your best work.
Okay.
Excellent. Well done. Well done. That's a good one.
I keep it all mainly to horrific crimes against humanity. That's my wheelhouse.
Yeah, I was going to say that's the secret vein of comedy that you have to mind.
Exactly.
Yeah. Just to tag on to what Christopher's been saying. I mean, for me, it's like what makes it worse is there are so many things that are abundantly clear that they've headed in, trended in the wrong direction. And yet now, if you look at the last 2 years, let's say, coming up to 3 in esports, you will see that the appetite for talking about these things has been utterly destroyed. It's just been neutered. Like I did an article that I never got around to publishing. It just felt like it was kind of redundant. I've been harping on about the Saudi stuff now, it feels like, for years. And I think even my audience might even have a little bit of fatigue about it.
I'm sure our audience will, Richard, too. I'm sure many people who clicked on this were reluctant to do so.
Yeah, absolutely. Because and that's one of the baked-in components of sports washing, by the way. It's to tie you up in knots and make it almost impossible for you to come up with a rationale that works, so you just disengage from the subject. And anyway, I went through and I had a look. I looked at all of the esports organizations that had historically done things for Pride, had historically sold Pride merch or done a Pride initiative or even just a post about Pride. And what I found was, like, over the last 2 years, they've just stopped doing it. They've stopped doing it because I think with the exception of Liquid, who, I don't know what's worse, to either try and tweet through the hypocrisy. No, we love the gays. I'm Steve Arnset. I'm hashtag out for Saudi. Everything's fine. The gays have a good time in Saudi. Don't think about it. I don't know if that's worse or doing what all the other orgs have done, which is to quietly just not mention it anymore, not reference it, pretend it's not a thing that they explicitly used for marketing purposes in years gone by. And I'm talking about even ones that might surprise you, like I think like T1 has done pride stuff in the past, which, we know like South Korea can be a little bit more conservative, and
Yep.
and we know from Activision Blizzard as well, they've took rainbows off South Korean broadcasts and Chinese broadcasts in the past. But T1 have promoted pride, and then no, we're not doing that anymore. Why? Because they're in the Esports World Cup club program, which means you're taking a big fat stipend from the Saudi Arabian Public Investment Fund, even though you've been telling everyone for the last however many years that your organizations are worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and yet you still need a state-approved handout just to operate, apparently. So yeah, I'm definitely sympathetic to where everybody's at with it, because it's like to the audience, they're just like, well, what can we do? And unfortunately, at this point, if you wanted to be morally consistent and push back against Saudi machinations, what you would have to do is disengage pretty much from all of esports. That's what you're faced with. And that's like a really, really tough ask for anybody that's like grown up and is a big fan of the space. And it's basically similar to like, what I went through as a Newcastle fan. A Newcastle Football Club gets bought by the Saudi Arabian PIF in a disgraceful move that should never have been approved, with the FA, the Football Association, essentially guiding the Public Investment Fund how to get through the hoops necessary and create enough layers of abstraction so it didn't qualify as a state-owned team. And now it's like, well, how can I ever buy a football shirt again? How can I justify pay-per-view to watch the game again? How can I ever buy a ticket to go and watch my football club play? I can't. It's baked into, now it's baked into this sports washing operation. And I followed Newcastle United since I was 8 years old. So it's like, to not have that anymore, I get it. Like, I definitely understand it, why a lot of esports fans will be feeling particularly jaded right now. And then, of course, just as the last part, there is the fact that for all of the mouthpieces telling you Saudi Arabia has improved, we can point to things, and we will, that show in some areas, in a lot of areas, it has got objectively worse. And at that point, I don't know if I want to just write you off as a useful idiot, frankly, because these things are publicly available.
Yeah, by the way, a few things as well. Well, obviously, we'll get into all of these, but I think at the top, some of the things I want to bring up is it's not just going to be things like what goes on in Saudi Arabia, what human rights offences do they have, what are their laws. It's not going to be totally dry. Like, for example, if you think about when we touch on some of the specific things that Riot in like their town hall and behind closed doors are saying, actually, it implies a lot of the things Richard's talking about. It's also about the public response to this. What can people in the ecosystem even say, and will this affect them being hired, however they behave? So I'll give you a quick example. One person who I thought was incredibly brave during this whole thing over the last couple of years was Sideshow, who works in Valorant, and who's someone who, as far as I can tell, if he just shut up and just talked on the mic about Valorant, he would be the number one person in his role in the world. He could probably be at every Valorant event if he wanted to be. He's like the go-to guy. He's also, by the way, incredibly an amiable person. I don't think anyone dislikes him in the scene. He's gone out of his way to make multiple videos now where he references Richard's work and other people's, where he goes through quite literally the human rights offences and the reasons why he doesn't want Saudi Arabia to be involved. Well, if you ever look at like how Riot has sort of messaged to other talent, the joke is, we'll get to it, they've almost made a rule that may as well be the no Sideshows making videos rule. Like, that's almost now baked in. So the joke is, when you go to Riot and go, hey Riot, I'm going to need to know how you're going to like protect us, they go, good news, first thing I'm going to do is stop you from doing all that shit. That was like it's already, the joke is they've already got the fix. They know what it is. And also, you'll notice how the tone has changed very differently, Richard. Whereas 4 or 5 years ago, it was like, this is not acceptable. I put my job on the line. I was willing to go to the 11th. Yeah. And then suddenly now it's like, I'm just so disappointed by it. Can I have the money, please? It's disappointing to have to take this money. And can I not even say if it was shit? Fuck it. And a bigger bag. It's disappointing that I have to do it. No, you don't have to do any of this. But people already have gone from essentially being like, I can't be part of this to, can I just not seem culpable? Like, can you just play the ad, but don't show like me on screen at the center? And I won't have to say anything, right? And by the way, when we get to it, you could do a masterclass job, Monty, of just doing the breakdown of that fucking piece of what they're saying between the lines. Like, I'll give you an example. The question is like, well, how will this affect people who want to speak out? And they're like, oh, you won't be obliged to be on the broadcast. Like, no. I asked how did I speak out? And then you explain how I won't have to be on the broadcast, but then you might have a baked-in rule that says no one can make videos criticize. Like, so essentially, we can't speak out anymore. So the maddest thing is, and at the very, very end, there's the notion, and this is so inherently inherently disingenuous. And let's get to this later, because it's the same thing the teams did. Certain teams last year said before IWC, thing is though, if someone is just uncomfortable or they are part of the LGBTQ community, obviously we would never oblige them to attend the event. But as pointed out, actually just the nature of how you would functionally have a partnership with those people and attend other tournaments would almost imply, like, if you're a member of a 5-man team, you can't opt out. Otherwise, eventually we're going to have to cut you from the team. It's just obvious. If you're a very star player in a game that we need you to represent, you know, you can say no this time, but the point is next year when your contract's up, am I really not going to factor that in? Am I not a human as your boss? Am I not going to think, well, I need someone to play WC? So similarly, Riot's tried to play the game of like, don't worry though, this won't affect your hiring decisions elsewhere. Well, yeah, because I'm not inside your fucking brain when you don't hire someone for next split, am I? Like, you can come up with any reason you need to. So don't worry, there's loads of actual
and they did that to me, by the way. They literally did that to me.
Potential drama in this episode that will touch on things about people that you care about, people on your screens that you love to listen to, and the very nature of the industry. This isn't just like, here's what they're hiding in Saudi and it's just all that. It's going to have a bigger impact than you think, guys. So buckle in for this one.
Yeah. So I think to Thorin's point, we will get to all of that later, and I'm going to compartmentalize these segments as such so that you can skip around.
You've already got
these sections up and slap them in a suitcase.
Exactly.
I'm going to let's first talk about, not for probably an extended period of time, because I'm going to link all of these articles below in the video. I'm going to bring up some of the more salient points, but about the horrendous stuff that Saudi is still doing, the human rights violations that are the issues. Then we're going to talk about the next port of call will be, these are the things Saudi Arabia is doing in the esports space, including the expansion into new games, the Olympics, the Esports Olympics, which they're going to be hosting for 12 years now.
Yep.
And after that, I think we'll go into some of the...
If you're someone out there with a Substack, it's low-hanging fruit, 12 years an esports slave. It's right there. If you just reach out and grab it, it's an easy go-to. It'll bang, go for it. Just go for it, guys.
So we'll talk about some of the stuff they're trying to do in esports, and then we'll talk about, finally, the effects on the scene and what can be reasonably done to stop this. I do also want to shout out Sideshow's latest video about... I mean, this was before the announcement, but about how he didn't want Valorant, the current game that he's working on. He's obviously an old colleague of mine from the Overwatch League. How he didn't want Valorant to join the Saudi circuit for EWC. In that article, he actually does in the video, sorry, he does a really good job of breaking down the effectiveness of the EWC in terms of viewership by game, and talks about ways that this could potentially be, slowed down or made less effective. You should go watch his video. I'm not going to repeat all of the points he made, but he does make some good ones, which we will also discuss here. Because if you guys have been following along with us on this subject, we have said previously, the teams are kind of in a bind because it's very difficult for them to sign quality players, because especially in games like Dota that have enormous prize pools, where if they don't participate, then their players don't go, and then they can't sign good teams. Like the teams are more or less in a bind, I think, here. But we'll get to that later. It's really the developers and, especially the co-streamers, which you can say the co-streamers are extremely guilty after this latest Esports World Cup. The co-streamers are super guilty because they are accounting for about 40% of the viewership of this thing, and they are getting personally paid by the Saudi government in order to co-stream. So them not participating would be an enormous dent. And Sideshow pointed this out via some ES Charts articles. But before we get into that, I do want to start with some articles that I'm also going to show on your screen now. So we're going to talk about, not this one first. Let's just go do a broad overview. This is from the Human Rights Watch about various ways in which the Saudi government is violating human rights. So we know that you can't actually express contrary political opinions in Saudi Arabia. They will jail you and torture you for retweeting things. Not even
they
tweeting
have
things.
Actually executed people apparently for political tweets, by the way.
Not only that, but they had moles inside of Twitter who had access to personal information.
I mean, they're
and
one of
these-
the biggest shareholders in Twitter. They have an obvious way to get all this stuff, of course, yeah.
So they had Middle East representatives in Twitter. So these were Twitter people who were supposed to take care of the Middle Eastern region, who were funneling personal information of Saudi dissidents to the Saudi government. That is true. The FBI arrested these people in the United States. As far as asylum seekers, now they are in an active war with Yemen. The Yemen-Saudi border, so on the south...
by the US, I will say, before anyone does some whataboutism.
Sure.
By the US.
Yeah.
UK and US are all over this shit, by the way.
And the US is giving them or selling them weapons, which are used in this. Like, let's be very clear. Also, it's not like the Yemeni Houthis are saints. They are, vicious. But it doesn't really excuse the brutal way the Saudis are going about this war, including they have killed hundreds of Ethiopian migrants and asylum seekers who tried to cross the Yemeni-Saudi border between March 2022 and June 2023. You could read this. If they committed crimes in these ways, it would be a crime against humanity. Their economy is enormously reliant on migrant workers, as you might have known from the Qatar World Cup that happened, where there was basically a bunch of indentured servants. There are 13.5 million migrants in Saudi Arabia, most of them from South Asia or Southeast Asia, so places like India, Bangladesh, or Africa. This is...
By the way, it's the same model as well, Monty. Like, somehow within their system, it's like just allowed to do the exact same famous thing everyone remembers from that World Cup of you just basically take the person's passport so they cannot leave. And then at that point in time, they do anything you say. Yeah, it's crazy, isn't it?
And also they're kept in very poor housing conditions. They are kind of baited into traveling there with these visas and then trapped there. I mean, obviously these people are trying to send money back most of the time to their families or have a better life for themselves. These migrant camps in which they're in are rife with violence and sexual violence. They are put in horrific construction conditions. And this is 41% of the people that are in Saudi Arabia are on these visas. So it is a system of indentured servitude. It is immoral. And a lot of the shiny things that are being built for the Esports World Cup, the studios, the hotels, the restaurants, are almost certainly being built with this arguably slave labor. So you have that problem as well.
One thing to just say quickly, Monty, because this is one thing I was never explicit enough about myself. When I would always say to people stuff like, if you don't like the way someone tweets, you're going to hate people who cut people's heads off. I think people think I'm like a sort of just over scandalizing the nature of the death penalty, because obviously, we have the electric chair in America. By the way, in England, up until something mad like the 60s, you could still actually have public hangings. It was a famous thing that they still did.
You could be executed by guillotine by the French until the 70s.
So if you do all these things, they're thinking it's something comparable. Like, obviously, the premise of the death row, if you think about the film like the fucking Eighth Mile, what's that fucking one? The Green Mile.
The Green Mile.
The whole premise of that was you only get on death row if you've done something insanely heinous. Like, you've just killed like 5 kids in cold blood and there was no possible way it wasn't you. And they just don't, they can't put you in normal prison. We're not even talking about that, guys. Like, literally, I looked into this as we were talking about. If you look into some of the people executed, first of all, they are literally being executed still to this day, not in lower numbers, in higher numbers. So in like 2020, there was something like, I think it was something like 20 something, whatever, people got executed. It's gone up every year since then, to the point that this last year, 2024, when we had the EWC there, it was something like 11 times more people executed. And they aren't just executed for what you're imagining. It's not like you're executing the greatest traitor to your country who worked with the enemy and sold them the nuclear bombs. It's not that sort of shit. It really is stuff like people who've done tweets, which can include things just like apostasy and blasphemy. So we're talking about, by the way, the equivalent of what like an edgy teenager might write on their fucking journal in like high school in America could get your fucking head cut off in Saudi Arabia. And people absolutely who are political dissidents have been not only jailed for a long time for this, but killed over these things. And the number of executions just increases. So the real problem there is you've got to look into the things they can do it for. And then one last detail, Monty, to tie into what you're saying. I know that the most obvious reason why people do not care about this topic, and their actions show they don't care, is because they just think to themselves stupid shit like, but I love the idea any American in politics would ever say this now. Well, who am I to tell them what to do in their country? Oh, you'll be glad to know that 39% of the people executed aren't even people from Saudi Arabia.
Yep.
They are foreign nationals, including, by the way, sometimes from like fucking Asian countries. You do care about fucking Koreans, etc., right? And people are Chinese, etc. I thought you cared about those people. Those are the best players in your game. Like, this is actually mental. I don't think people realize this is not just like, it's just some, well, here's what goes on in this part of the world. Like, this is just a fucking regime that's doing this to people coming through their country or who've ever interacted with their country. So it's way more pervasive than people realize. And again, here's what I will not accept in this conversation, Monty. You can't go, well, first of all, the nonsense rhetoric would have been, well, if they're doing less of the killings, Thorin, that's progressive. They're not, they're doing more. So how are you gonna square that circle?
2024, they executed 330 people, which was the highest on record, and over 100 of those people were not Saudi. They were not Saudi.
And then similarly, if you're going to do the argument of like, it's progressive is where you go like, we're not going to do this anymore. It's not, it wouldn't even be progressive to go, instead of killing 10 people, just 9. That's not, that you're still killing people. Like at that point in time, like you square it any way you want, figure out any justification, you are aligning yourself. And then one last detail, and if I'd have known this, Richard, I'd have hit this so much harder years earlier, is it's one thing if you use compartmentalization and you say, well, I'm technically just getting my money from the Savvy Games Group, which is a subsidiary of the PIF, which yes is like controlled and funded by the well-funded the Saudi regime, but what they do separate to that, it's too many layers of abstraction. What can I do? Oh no, it turns out the PIF itself has literally used their funds to root out anti-corruption and find people like this, and potentially was in fact even one of the things that funded the famous execution of a journalist under like totally insane circumstances. So that is the same actual bag of money that they give you your money out of, bro. That is who you are taking. You're not even telling them, at least fucking give me it with the right hand if the left hand does all the bloody business. In this scenario, they don't even wipe the blood off. They just pick up your dollar bills and throw them at you, you whore.
Yeah. I mean, you have to understand as well, right? Like there's been a whole thing going on in Saudi right now where they've had to temporarily pause executions of teenagers. The Saudi courts have basically put it on hiatus because there was a number of teenagers. There was like something like 7 people under the age of 18 that were on death row for things they'd done.
And was it things like tweets for them as well?
Attending riots or attending protests, I should say, because obviously Saudi doesn't have riots. But you know, it's been temporarily paused because of obviously international efforts from groups like Amnesty International, widespread condemnation. You know, even news outlets in America have condemned this. There was one case I think of it was a guy called Mataja Quireris, and he was arrested at 13 and interrogated, and was essentially on death row for crimes against.
By the way, you notice what that even implies if you think about it. Oh, so if people kick up enough fuss, they might pause killing people. So that means all the people they kill. What does that imply, guys? Yeah. What does that imply you could do en masse for the whole industry? If the whole industry was like, hey, you know what? Tell you what, crazy idea. A mass stipulation for next year's deal is, can you just not... By the way, are you ready? This is how crazy esports is. I wouldn't even be outrageous enough to say stop killing them entirely. Just maybe don't kill them the month we're there. Would that be too much to ask? It would actually, it turns out. If you're looking at it, that would be too much to ask. They actually killed them the month you go there, you idiots.
During the Esports World Cup, I believe they had the largest mass execution in a number of years in the time that these esports events were going on. And so these death penalties could result from a variety of things. I mean, part of the issue is that there is no penal code in Saudi Arabia, which means that there is no precedent. So when the judges who make their rulings based off of Sharia law, there isn't a maximum or minimum sentence, and there isn't a precedent. It's whatever they feel like, which is obviously incredibly influenced by the government of the country. And so they're going to give certain people significantly harsher sentences than other people. And that's why it's just such a mixed bag where you just never know what you're actually going to end up with for the same crime. Potentially.
When you read these pieces, you just think you are on crazy pills too, because you'll get to a sentence and it'll be like, and then they gave him 20 years, but after much public, dispute, it was lowered to 10. And you're like, What are we talking about here? What is this? That's the good news. Fucking hell, what's the bad news?
So the executions for minor drug offenses, it could be a capital punishment to be gay, protesting against the government, protesting against their laws against women. There are many, many ways in which you can find yourself in very deep, potentially, life-endangering legal trouble within Saudi Arabia. So the executions are a big part of it. This is something that hasn't gotten better. Like we said, 2024 was actually the biggest year on record. So that's not changing, and that is appalling in and of itself. And I think the other thing that we need to talk about that hasn't changed is, this has been a big topic, like you say, within our industry, the LGBTQ community, as well as the treatment of women, which is one of the things that comes up most frequently.
Technically, that one, Monty, in some senses got worse. You know, the whole they drive now. Well, here's a good one. Because of the male guardianship rule, if you look into what that specifies, it quite literally contains essentially an injunction to wives that they cannot deny sex to their husbands.
Yep.
That's a real, that's like put into the fucking rule, mate. That's not even implied.
So what happened, guys, is on International Women's Day in 2022, of course, they issued a new law that enshrined male guardianship on International Women's Day. And they said this was progressive, by the way, but you'll see it's pretty regressive.
Logic is, that's why they say guardianship, Monty. Their logic is they're looking after women by doing this. So they're doing them a favor, basically.
So what happens is... this is a quote, on International Women's Day last year, the Saudi authorities proclaimed they had passed a progressive personal status law, but instead simply enshrined discrimination against women into the legal code. So what this means, as Thorin said, a husband's financial support is specifically contingent on a wife's obedience, and she could lose her right to such support if she refuses without a legitimate excuse to have sex with him, move to or live in the marital home, or travel with him. The law further states that neither spouse may abstain from sexual relations or cohabitation without the other spouse's consent, implying a marital right to intercourse. The husband can also unilaterally, the husband can unilaterally divorce his wife. A woman has to go to court.
To 4 wives as well, by the way. You can just get multiple at the same time. That's literally also allowed, of course.
A woman can only petition a court to dissolve their marriage contract on limited grounds, which obviously the courts are extremely influenced by people of power. So if you have the right connection, you can just deny somebody's, right to divorce you, basically. Fathers remain the default guardians of their children. Mothers cannot fully participate in decisions related to their child's social and financial well-being. There is also interesting new things that have happened, which include that they have actually changed their laws on child marriage with this law from 2022. So basically, previously, in January 2019, there was a setting of the minimum age of marriage at 18, but leaving exceptions for girls 15 to 17 to marry with court approval. But this new law says you can be even younger and married. So
progression. All right. Well,
regression. So it says the legal age of marriage is 18. However, it allows courts to authorize the marriage of a child under 18 if they have reached puberty, which could be younger than 15, and if the marriage provides an, quote, established benefit, unquote, to the child. The law does not define puberty, though in practice this is understood for girls to refer to her first menstruation. The early marriage approval process can be initiated online with the Justice Ministry and requires evidence such as medical records to prove the child's competence. So basically, you can go file an online form to marry a girl who could be as young as, 10, 11, 12?
Whenever your first period is,
With the doctor's medical note, this can just be approved through online means. And also,
I was just going to say, what's really insidious about this is the fact that, these people in esports, think about the things that they have taken very public stances on. For example, when, Roe v. Wade was fucking struck down in the Supreme Court.
Oh, sure.
And people were going, but it's women's bodily autonomy. Does it sound like these women have bodily autonomy? You're carrying water for a regime that would do this to little girls. Think about how they've said they don't want bathroom laws around, trans issues. And then it's like, okay, well, here's some kids, basically, by any other name, being subject to genital inspection.
Yep.
Thought these things were bad guys. So
also, wasn't it part of that new law also that like you could even also be found guilty of just like dressing as like the opposite sex in public? That actually was built into it. Yeah, I think that was one of the factors.
they have obviously they have a cross-dressing laws is how they get you if you're trans, because they don't actually have a specific statute or anything they can point to about trans people. That's
and
what
exactly.
they say you're dressing immodestly because it's not in line with your gender tradition.
This childhood marriage, by the way, is not just occasional. And you should know this by the fact that they have these online forms to fill out. This is rubber stamped by the courts. In 2017, 15,000 Saudis aged 15 to 17 were married in 2017. So there's no way they can actually process all of these applications. This is just them saying yes almost every single time without looking into these cases, which means that with the new system, you can actually marry somebody younger. And remember, as soon as they're married, they cannot refuse sex for any reason. So there you go. Like, if you actually care about women's rights are not getting better. You can't just say, well, they can drive. Like, they have no autonomy. They have no autonomy over their children. They have no autonomy over their bodies. They get married off when they could be extremely young, possibly barely double digits in age. And they can't get divorced in these scenarios because that will most likely be denied. And they have
also, Monty, anyone who ever says, here's the counter, you tell them. When they say they can drive now, here's what you tell them to do. Look up the name, Lujain Al-Haflul. That is the woman who was the activist who pushed for Saudi women to be able to drive. She's in prison for 6 years. So,
yep. And you also have to get permission from your husband to drive the car. So it's not like you can just make that decision. Everything
but when
has
she
to be
gets
approved.
out, Duncan, she can drive herself home from the prison, bro.
If her husband says yes. If her husband
and then immediately
yes.
have sex with him that night if he says so,
Yeah.
By the way, I'll tell you another thing I think is incredibly insidious, Monty, is have you noticed how if you actually think how these laws would be applied in like a common or garden everyday manner, they're exactly the sort of insane patriarchal overreach all these Western people are against. Like, imagine the idea, Monty, of the woman had to stay with the man because she has a kid with him, and what will he do with the kid? Oh, don't worry, the guardianship goes straight to the man. So the second that he gets you pregnant as an 11-year-old or whatever, and you have the kid, well, now you literally have to stay with him and do everything he says anyway. But on top of that, there's no way you're getting your kid. So if you leave, you just lose your kid, which is some women is going to be the most important thing in the world to them. At that point in time, that's fucking heinous that you're allowing people that power over another person.
Yeah. And by the way, guys, you probably haven't heard a lot of this stuff because things like golf, professional golf, and the Esports World Cup and all of the entertainment, this is what sports washing is. It is designed to flood the media with positive public relations for Saudi Arabia so you never hear about this stuff. And it is regressive. And these things have happened in the last couple of years. And it's not getting better. And saying like, well, cutting them off is not going to do anything. Actually, cutting off oppressive regimes has been the most effective way to deal with them since, contemporary geopolitics began. And the fact is that they are using Western PR and things that Western people care about to endear themselves to you so that you don't actually say anything about this stuff or even understand that it's going on. So no, the closer you get to them, the more effective their regressive tactics in their own country are, because it's a shield for them continuing to crack the whip. And that's it. So there's no point, because you will never get through to them because they're still doing these things and it's getting worse in a lot of cases. So they're clearly not listening.
I mean, we basically called it on this show anyway, which was Riot's decision to expand was inevitable. You go back to the original reporting I did around the Neom deal in 2020, and the executives in the NA branch of Riot Games, they all concluded that the only thing that was handled incorrectly about the Neom deal was the timing and the messaging, because obviously it happened during Germany's Pride Month parade in Berlin, in a studio in Berlin with staff who lived in Berlin. And so obviously that did put a lot of people's noses out of joint. However, internally, Riot was saying, look, we fucked up with the timing, we fucked up with the messaging, but don't worry about it. And still to this day, despite the fact they publicly said, we understand you're disappointed, we understand you feel let down, we're going to review this. Nobody lost their job, nobody was
They
disciplined.
even described it in the post, Riot, as a mistake, Richard, but it wasn't a mistake, was it? And it clearly wasn't behind
Riot
the scenes
don't make
mistake.
mistakes.
No.
Riot, of course, don't make mistakes, quite famously. So obviously, we knew they were coming back, and then one of the ways that the Saudi Arabian executives that were in tune with esports did this was through the creation of companies like Savvy, because the Neom deal was so widely rejected. And if you remember, the person that presided over the project for Neom, there was a report it was either the Washington Post or the New York Times, I can't remember which, but apparently, according to sources who were at the meeting, he said, I have a gun in this desk and I will shoot whoever is responsible for this deal being
some John Wick
collapsed.
shit. It's mad, isn't it? It sounds like some other movie.
Yeah, right. So after that, they then come back now, and then what did people start saying immediately out of the gate? Oh, well, it's different when it's a sponsor. It's different when it's a sponsor. How can you stop? You can't stop the owners of the companies if it was a sponsorship deal.
Yep, that's
so
what
then they started saying that. Then it was like, look, we're going to just try this Esports World Cup thing, because we've always wanted to expand into the Middle East, and this is a good opportunity to do it. But we're just going to test it out with League of Legends. They gave up their most prized possession, which was the scarcity of international tournaments. They just handed that over for nothing. And then now they've turned around and gone, we're doing it for all of our games as well, but not games.
They handed it over for a fat licensing fee, Richard.
Well, I mean, yeah. Well, I mean, but like,
for
ultimately, though, in the grand scheme of things, I mean, what are we even really talking about there? I mean, like, consider the fact that, yes, if you look at Riot Games and its esports division as like, totally separate from the company, then they're probably not as financially, they're not making as much money as they probably should. But it's tied to Tencent, bro, one of the wealthiest, biggest companies in the world. Like, you actually don't need to be doing any of this.
No, we'll get to that.
By the way, one thing to quickly address as well is, it isn't, if you want to know, like in the industry, one of the cleverest ways they've been able to get all this shit through, it's also, here's the mistake they made with the Neom shit, Monty. You really were a bunch of people representing Saudi Arabia who are like, hey, we'd like to buy it in this way. When you do it that way, it's very easy for the person who's just in the middle part of the industry to go, oh, some outsiders asking this. The genius of it was to buy ESL Faceit Group. So all of a sudden, the people you're dealing with are the actual people, if you don't know who built esports, like Ralph Reichart and ESL, and the people who run all the best events. And in fact, if you already worked in Counter-Strike, you already work with these people anyway, and you do go to Germany, you do go to Sweden, it's all the same faces, those smiling faces that previously you loved. Well, here's the reason why that's also doubly egregious that these people in ESL, for example, are involved with all this. Because, Monty, when I did an event in 2019, when I did the ESL New York event, but I did the group stage remotely from Cologne, one of the things ESL at the time, think of the timing of this, 2019, was doing, was they brought forwards, this is real, behind closed doors, they brought an any key fucking pledge. Any key, if you don't know, was a thing, it's called an advocacy organization that supports diversity, inclusion, and equity in competitive gaming. I think they were funded by Intel at one point in time. And they brought this pledge, and they made all the talent sign this pledge that was some Orwellian shit, like, I will not engage in sexist and racist behavior, and it was like some insane, like, fucked up, like, pledge you had to do, right? The same people now, like, as I make the joke, who now work directly for the Saudis, like, your own boss couldn't sign that in good faith. Like, it would be impossible. In fact, the logic would be, I'd love to pull up that fucking pledge and use it as a bingo card to see all the fucked up shit you and your bosses are now aligned with because of that. Like, that's the worst thing about this industry. People just only did it as a luxury belief to just go like, oh, and also I care about some causes, lol, when it doesn't really affect me. And essentially, the whole Neom LEC thing can just be described as, we were were willing to give up potentially 1 day's pay to make a stand, oh, what's that? I'd actually have to give up my job. Well, fuck, I'm disappointed, but I guess I'll take the money. Like that's probably the worst thing about. Oh, the joke is the worst thing is all the human rights violations. But within these, I won't get.
Don't do the Norm Macdonald joke.
I won't do it, mate. I won't do it. But within the context of esports, one of the worst things to me is that the very people, if you, by the way, were naively some 13-year-old in fucking Saudi Arabia who cared about this, who if you looked online would go, hey, these people have my back in esports, or those are literally the people who then sold out. They sold you out, bro.
Yeah,
sorry, I'm sorry to say it, but it wasn't that like they went, oh, fuck, well, I can't be involved, and someone else came along, some new breed of shit. No, it was all the people you love. They're the ones who sold you out. I'm sorry, by the way, and I don't actually say that with the zeal and fucking relish people imagine, because, yeah, it includes people I don't like, Monty. Also includes people I very much do like and respected and thought were really legit people. And sometimes I even did genuinely think they did do a stand for the real reasons. It's just now they've sort of recanted / I've got to take the money or whatever. So, yeah. There's a lot of, sadly, this is a bit of a bomber episode in that sense for me too.
Yeah. I've got one last thing I want to talk about here, which is the proposed penal code that's coming up for Saudi Arabia. So basically, as you guys can see here, this is Amnesty International, very famous human rights NGO. Basically, there was a leaked draft of Saudi Arabia's first penal code. Which, as we said, is one of the big problems with Saudi Arabia because the justice is arbitrary there.
Yes.
There is a report called Manifesto for Repression that you can click here on this link at amnesty.org. And basically, you could read the report, but effectively, here's a quote. As it stands, the draft code shatters the illusion that the Crown Prince is pursuing a truly reformist agenda. Saudi Arabia is at a critical juncture. With the draft penal code currently under legislative review, the authorities still have a chance to demonstrate to the world their pledges of reform are more than empty promises. But the problem is, guys, that there really hasn't been anything done in this draft penal code, which was leaked in July 2022, that still has freedoms criminalized. It actually continues to allow for domestic abuse and gender-based violence. Continues to have the death penalty for a variety of causes. Child offenders, as we talked about earlier, the draft code allows child offenders to be executed for certain crimes and sets the age of criminal responsibility at 7 years old. So a kid who's 7 could theoretically be responsible for a capital crime.
I mean, come on, Monty. Don't you remember when you were 7? Knowing right from wrong?
I mean, my son's about to turn 5, so it's kind of disturbing. This is what gets to me, man. Like, beyond all of this just being extremely wrong, if you are from a Western society or a first world country, generally speaking, there are a bunch of people who have kids who are involved in this, and people with daughters who are just totally okay with continuing to work in these jobs where their express purpose, because the Esports World Cup does not make any financial sense. It's not a functional business that is designed to turn a profit. The whole purpose is to sports wash, to cover up these crimes. And how you could do that and then have a daughter or your kids and feel that this is an acceptable use of your life is astonishing.
It's worse than that, because they use them as the justification, as we've quite famously seen. That it's like, you know, this is my job, this is my craft. I couldn't possibly do anything else. You know, I couldn't possibly do that. So obviously, to feed my kids and keep a roof over their house, I guess some 7-year-olds are just gonna have to get banged up abroad, aren't they? That's just how it's gonna have to be. And so that's the way the internal mechanism works there. And it's by the way, like I said, look, I understand perhaps more than anyone the complexities of trying to walk the, let's say, grey morality of international geopolitics. You know, people have criticized me and said, well, you had that Air Force sponsor on E-League, even though I said I wouldn't do ad reads at the Boston Major. I wrote articles publicly at the time saying I don't want any form of military or government advertising attached to esports, because I think governments are generally evil of all stripes. I'm not really a government guy, like, funnily enough. And I've talked about how, I was one of those people. I was young enough to be out on the streets marching when we invaded Iraq and Afghanistan in total fucking bogus circumstances. By the way, no one has paid for those war crimes still to this day.
Yep.
And I was the one saying, hey, look, if we want to ban all these Russians for invading Ukraine, let's just take it back a few years.
Yeah.
And let's ban some Americans, because you also invaded a sovereign nation and killed civilians and committed war crimes. So, and don't even get me started on how in the Bush years, torture was essentially codified as acceptable, and the abuses that went on in Guantanamo Bay
And Abu Ghraib.
Right? So you don't need to tell me about these things, because one of the things everyone thinks they're being really slick. They go, but you've never said anything bad about America. Bro, before esports, I was saying the American
Well, also the other gotcha is like,
globally.
but what about China? And guys,
Yeah.
China isn't running a sports washing campaign in esports. And we have criticized China. It's like, because you didn't see it doesn't mean it doesn't happen. But the clear point of the Saudi stuff is that there are people, thousands of them, who are now in esports working directly for the Saudi government for the explicit purpose of sports washing human rights abuses.
Okay.
That isn't true of China.
Monty, I'll give you an example as well. This is how absurd the premise is. You couldn't even write this as a fucked up dark comedy skit. So imagine the scene, Monty. You're in prison. It's actually a really you're on death row, Monty. There's two guys sat there. Say guys. One of them's a man. One's an 8-year-old boy. The man turns to the 8-year-old boy. He says to him, "What are you in here for?" And he goes, "Apostasy." And the guy goes, "Oh, what the hell? I'm only in here for forcing my wife to have sex with me." The joke is the man wouldn't be in prison.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
That should be a super dark fucking skit. That could just be real. That's real. What are we even talking about at this point in time?
I mean, so to your point as well, Monty, this is one of the things that I always find is a pretty big tell about this. People have intimated that I might be an Islamophobe, and the reason that I do this is from my decadent white privilege Western viewpoint. I hate any country that might embrace Sharia law, because I have something inherently baked into my cultural outlook that means I don't like
you would
Muslims.
protest the war against Iraq and Afghanistan if you hated Muslims. Like,
I know,
it doesn't really drive with me, but whatever.
No, but then again, they didn't see that happen.
Right, fair enough.
Who in esports has spoke up for the Uyghurs quite publicly?
You're one of the only ones I've ever heard, mate.
That was me, right? So, interestingly enough, when there was a genocide against a distinct ethnic class of Muslims happening in mainland China, I was the one talking about it. And yet, when you bring that up to those people, going, "Well, why did I stand up for the Uyghurs?" By the way, it's really, achieved absolutely nothing, because in the same way, you're not going to move the dial for Saudi because the big money machine is going. It's absolutely the same for China. No one, not even the games developers, nobody is even ever going to talk about, Tibet or Taiwan, Hong Kong, what they're doing to the Uyghur Muslims in the autonomous Xinjiang region. We're not talking about any of these things. There's too much money to be made. So when I say that to these people, there's never a reply, and it's because it's actually those individuals. They are very, unfortunately, there's a big propaganda apparatus at play when it comes to discussion around Saudi Arabia, and that's why I've always just used the catchphrase "they drive now" as a catch-all for that, because the insane justifications people will come back. As I said, Sam Matthews did it at Fnatic, literally sending me links of going, and they got rid of the chaperone laws, and it's like, right. Do you know what happened at the same time? They made a bunch of those reforms. In Iran, the so-called morality police had beat a young girl to death while in custody for the heinous crime of dressing immodestly. The Iranian people then rose up and started attacking the morality police on site and said, "We won't live like this," and tried to overthrow their government. And bizarrely, despite all of our protestations about Iran being a great evil and fighting a proxy war against the West, not only did we betray the Iranian people by not covering it in the media, that was the time to absolutely go and fund a coup. right? Which I know America. It's weird. You talk a
Well,
lot
we
about
tried
coups
that
these
last
days.
time, you know.
Yeah, well, this was the time to do it because the people had an appetite. We could have gone back to 70s Iran. We could have got rid of all the
Sure.
demented clerics that run that
Yeah.
fucking country and have run it into the ground and betray their own people on a fucking daily basis. We could have done that now. You want Western intervention, which, by the way, not a fan of it. But if we're going to do it, then, you know, maybe you can make rationales. Maybe you can say Saddam Hussein had to go. Maybe you can say the Ayatollah's got to go. Maybe you can say these things. But we don't even equally apply that. We don't do it when an African dictator is fucking butchering his people. We don't do it in other certain countries where people live in tyranny. So I just like you can see immediately the pieces on the board and how it doesn't all fucking add up. It doesn't make any coherent sense. The propaganda apparatus that's at play to basically tell you that Saudi Arabia are getting more and more progressive, when actually it was just the Saudi Arabian government looking at what was happening in Iran and going, that can't happen to us. Let's give them a few scraps from the table. Let's do some fucking publicity shots of, like, you know, here's a woman in a full niqab, right, fucking driving, and the incongruousness of that. Nobody laughed at how ridiculous that is, just as a photo opportunity. A woman having to cover herself from head to foot, but she can drive now, putting a seatbelt on. You can't even see a smile because her mouth's covered. Right. And so this is what MBS did. He gave some like cultural crumbs off the opulent table. Meanwhile, in many other areas, culturally regressing Saudi Arabia in a way that hasn't happened in decades, because you see, MBS likes Western values. MBS likes Western money. MBS wants to naturalize relations with Israel and America, and he's very much part of that. But domestically, he knows the traditionalists and the Saudi conservatives, they would never want to live like the West. And so he has to try and do this fucked up balancing act where it's one rule for thee and certainly not for me.
There's also the other aspect where that I think part of this is also that Mecca is in Saudi Arabia, and if they were to become too westernized, they might invite terrorism from other Muslims potentially, because the pilgrimage to Mecca is a mandatory part of the Islamic religion.
By the way, if you look into it, they even literally use the idea that, guess what, America, you taught them the playbook. They just accuse you willy-nilly with no evidence of being in Al-Qaeda if they want to do all this shit to you and put you in prison and torture and kill you, by the way. That's straight out the Guantanamo playbook. Also, if you're someone in esports, here's an example of where you done fucked up thinking that you had abstraction through Savvy, the fucking, so ESL Faceit Group, Savvy, PIF, then the regime. No. First of all, Richard showed this when they initially launched Savvy. They went out of their way to message over and over again that they have direct links. They even say MBS is a big gamer. Yep. The joke there is, well, yeah, you know what? I guess the Gamergate movement was right. Gamers are just people who hate women, Richard, and want to fuck with them out. Yeah, the jokes right themselves on that one, but you didn't even think that one through. So they say he's a big gamer and he's super hands-on with how he deals with this. Well, here's a little detail about MBS you might not know, guys. Right? First of all, you want to say whataboutism. Here's some whataboutism for you. So the US used to have a president called Joe Biden. When Joe Biden went there, he fist bumped MBS and then granted him immunity from being sued in US courts for the killing of a journalist in his country. It's or like an embassy or whatever the fuck. So
in Turkey.
Absolutely the fucking West and America has absolutely been completely complicit within this. In fact, they've gone out of their way to ensure people like that never see prosecution for things they've done. So those are the people who are funding and running the PIF, and the PIF is a fund that has been used for incredibly heinous things like this. And that is where your money comes from. Understand that. Don't think that thing of like, well, every dollar passed around the world has some blood on it. Yours doesn't. Yours literally, the blood just splattered on it, and then it was handed to you directly afterwards, and then you used that metaphorically to feed your kids. So, by the way, in this scenario, a regime that might have actually imprisoned a kid younger than your kids for something like blasphemy, which at this point in time, I will say ironically, God only knows what that means. I feel if you don't understand things like apostasy and blasphemy, it's like the reasonable, like, responsibility of the wife to have sex. Holy fuck. You've intentionally left that so wide open, you could drive a bus through that one, mate. Like, I don't even know how you ever imagine you're going to nail that down. That almost just says you can do what you want within reason. Another great use of phrasing.
Yeah. I mean, so you know, look, I'll also just add as well on the point Duncan made. I read obviously, as we know as well, one of the big problems we've got in the industry is, and it's why we don't have a guest, as you said at the top of the show. One of the problems we've got is talking about this as a kiss of death for the career, especially as more and more of esports becomes captured. And so, one of the things that I did was there's a number of like what I call friendlies. And you know that, like, for example, Saudi Arabia just bought Rolling Stone. They've blacklisted a ton of journalists in a very Saudi Arabian state move. I'm one of them. And the VentureBeat / GamesBeat is obviously another friendly outlet. They've written a number of puff pieces, and they're always there whenever they need a mouthpiece. And by the way, if you go and look at the articles they've written, there's always a disclosure that yes, we were paid to go to Saudi Arabia in the Esports World Cup, and etc. etc. So anyway, Steve Arhenset, #out for Saudi, said where he gave a reason as to why Team Liquid were playing in the Esports World Cup. That basically was, look, we really moved the dial because we had a rainbow that absolutely wasn't the pride flag on the back of our jerseys,
right.
and so he talked about how that was historic, and he said we were at we still got to be who we are, and I'll just read you from the article. He said, maybe there are queer Saudis who saw that and realized that there's a tournament happening in Riyadh where pride icons are being broadcast online. By the way, we call that a honey trap, Steve. Like, yeah, all the gay Saudis were building. MBS would fucking thank you, mate. He'd give you a fucking gold-plated Ferrari on the way out if you somehow convinced all of the gays in Saudi Arabia to go into one fucking building and just lock the doors, and that's the end of that chapter, mate. So have a think about what you're implying with that, but what do I know? You know, whatever. Anyway, so he said that. Then he said, maybe there's a future that's different from the one they thought was always going to be. I felt the same thing, being gay in the United States and thinking I could never get married, and then one day realizing the law of the land had changed. That meant a lot to me in that moment. Will we change things overnight? No. Will people doubt us and think everything we're doing is sports washing? Sure. But we have to believe in what we see and experience firsthand, believe in nudging and incremental change over time. We want to be part of that. And then the journalist at GamesBeat, who's totally independent and not a friendly, said, that's a very measured way of looking at it, right? To which Steve Arnset replied, that's right. Change doesn't happen overnight. It happens slowly over time. It happens in moments you don't plan for. One day you wake up and realize things are different than they used to be. Here we sit on such an amazing opportunity where gaming, of all things, of all the industries that could connect us, gaming is connecting us here in Saudi Arabia. My love for League of Legends, MBS's love for League of Legends, the players' love for League of Legends, all around the world in so many different countries, all coming together here to share something we all love. It's about love, see? It's like Star Wars. It's about family.
Well, the funny thing is, they also would agree with things like age is just a number and love is love. They would also agree with those slogans, Steve.
Yeah.
So,
You know, it's kind of like so grotesque.
that's wild, isn't it?
Like to kind of
Especially
imply.
why even mention MBS? Don't even mention by name, for fuck's sake. Have the good decency and keep the name out your fucking mouth. That's literally the guy doing the shit.
But put it this way, right? I've said it many times, but I just don't think there's any other way to get across to these people, right? Like how fucked up what they're doing actually is, because unfortunately, everyone's brain just broke in like 2015, and you have to talk about everything using metaphors and similes around Donald Trump, and I hate that because it's like it's just all anyone ever talks about. But once again, we must do it. So imagine if Donald Trump had ordered the mass execution of 300 gay rights activists, women rights activists, trans activists, right? Okay. And then he ran an esports tournament at Trump Tower. Because we've got the best esports athletes. The biggest prize pool.
And then the people working with him go, here's the thing though, he's a massive gamer. He's really hands-on with this game.
I was really surprised because, you know, like Donald Trump actually...
And he's changing, guys. I know he's still executing people, but he is changing very, very slowly. You know, actually, only several more thousand people have to die in order for the change to be complete.
I've never heard anyone ever make any kind of cogent argument for how, like, well, actually, we should work with Donald Trump and the Republicans in America because over time we can change them, and change is incremental. Now, by the way, in the lifetime that I've led, I have seen incremental change. I never thought I would have seen a Republican nominee waving a pride flag. Donald Trump did that. We've obviously legalized gay marriage in America to the point now where, there's some thoughts in the LGBT community that actually we've lost a lot of our impetus for activism because that was the big one. That was even something that as late as 2012, Democrats were saying in debates. I don't know. It's Adam and Eve, isn't it? Not Adam and Steve. That's what people were, this was like the argument that like they were making. And yet here we are now. Well, listen, guys, we'll just work with Republicans, yeah? No need to be tweeting about it. No need between. But here's the thing: they wouldn't do a Republican fundraiser. They wouldn't go to Trump Tower to play in that esports tournament. They would be appalled at the walking back of LGBT rights in America that's going on right now. They would be disgusted by it. And yet, unfortunately, if I ever fucking see, I'll spit in your face if you ever talk about any of this ever again anywhere near me. Because you have forfeited all rights. Because you know what's worse than a Republican saying, stay away from the kids. Right? You know what's worse than that? A fucking actual political figure murdering these people and then just getting on a plane and just laughing about it like it was nothing to him. That's disgusting. And to carry water for that type of regime, while at the same time wanting all of the cultural cachet that being anti-Republican gets you in modern America, is pathetic, hypocritical, and just disgusting to me. And you should feel disgusted when you look at yourself in the mirror. You should fucking hate what you are because there's no moral consistency there. And I don't want to hear. I don't want to hear about your moral framework where it's like, oh no, but they are different, see, because they are 100 years behind us culturally, so we have to give them leeway. Meanwhile,
you either have values or you don't.
Yeah,
like that's
exactly.
it. That's it.
It's so like everyone as well understands it. Like when you present it, like it's just as black and white as that. People do understand it, but it's like, look, Donald Trump and the Republicans aren't putting up money. And by the way, let's stop saying his name for a moment. What about Putin? Right? What about Putin? Invading a sovereign nation, committing war crimes in Ukraine, plunge the world onto the precipice of fucking World War III as we try and figure out what the best solution to extricate ourselves from all of this nonsense is. Right? Well, okay, Vladimir Putin, right? Let's say he wants to put his state money into an esports tournament. By the way, literally happened. What do people say? Well, you can't compete with that. People are dying in Ukraine. People are dying in Saudi.
And in
Saudi,
Yemen. Almost 400,000 people have died in the Saudi-Yemen war?
That also includes people where like they starved and stuff as well, wasn't it?
Yeah, also all of the esports people, right? Benjamin Netanyahu announces the IDF Masters for esports. Guys, are you there? Are you there? Because we're all gamers and like, look, we can change Israel's view on Gaza if we just, I heard Netanyahu's platinum. So let's fucking go, guys.
Sure.
You wouldn't say these things. You would, before they even left your mouth, you would realize how absurd they were. But here's the difference: you've never been tested. You've never been tested by Russian money or Israeli money or any of these other aspects. It is just China and Saudi for now, and you have failed the test both times. So because you have all failed the test universally as an industry both times, I don't want to hear about the other stuff. I don't want to hear about where you're not tested. Because I know you will fail. I know you will fail. So it's absurd. That interview, by the way, will go down for me as historically one of the most. It's like I said, to call it embarrassing is to be really dismissive and reductive of how insidiously evil it is to go out to your own people and say, hey guys, look, I'm like you, incredibly wealthy, privileged, and a business partner of the Saudi Arabian state, and I walk around and nobody harasses me with the armed guards just out of shot that we know they have to have
fucking Riyadh Disneyland, where you never have to see the camps with the indentured servants / slaves.
By the way,
they literally make sure you have the best time possible. So you tweet about it. You say, it's so safe and I love it here.
I would ask Steve, in your great quest to find approval for the decisions you've made in doing business with the Saudi Arabian state. As I said, by the way, they said, oh, we talked to Amnesty International and they told us to boycott. I want this on record, and guys can Google this and check for yourself. Amnesty International never advocates for boycotts. So it's not something they do. In fact, if you go to Amnesty International's website, they have a page explaining why they don't do that. So if you know that and you ask them, hey, should we boycott this thing? They would go, Amnesty International has never advocated for a boycott. That is not the same as saying Team Liquid shouldn't boycott in this particular instance. You knew what answer you were going to get. So I would be very intrigued to know a few more details about those conversations. But let's also just say, Steve, since you're so interested in getting to the real of what Saudi Arabia is, did you ask to go to these prisons? Did you ask to meet with people who've been imprisoned because they're gay or they're human rights activists or women's rights activists? Did you ask to go to the jails and see how they were being treated? After all, you've got carte blanche, right? They've rolled out the red carpet for you.
Did you even walk around?
Why haven't you done that?
Anywhere besides where they told you to go? Did you go to where 40% of the country lives, those 40% who are not Saudi nationals? Did you see where they live?
By the way, that's even a classic historic thing. You guys essentially went to the Soviet Union or North Korea to a Potemkin village and went, it's here, look, it's awesome. It's none of that shit you guys said. And then also, I'll just put this out there. This is why even saying the sentence like, and they put activists in prison for decades. Oh, it's not prison where you're just like in England where you're playing fucking snooker and going, what time's the TV? They're torturing you in the fucking prison. Like you're just getting destroyed as an actual fucking sentient human being existing in this world. And here's why it's so gross that to do all these things, you have to actually essentially almost like silently or appear on camera, almost like pledge allegiance to MBS. This is why the fact you even let his name come out your mouth is fucking gross. Because Richard, I learned in 2022 that we had an incredibly high standard for who you could appear on camera and with association with.
Absolutely.
A guy called Carlos appearing on camera for 0.1 milliseconds with Andrew Tate, who never in any context was ever involved with esports, got everyone in the whole industry to go, something must be done. He must be divested of everything in the industry unless he openly denounces this person. He then didn't, and in a very vague allusion said, like, you cannot police my friends, and was basically forced to privately just exit the public space in esports. And we were told it is unacceptable to associate with that person or for that person to be involved in esports. Well, then the same standard must be applied to Mohammed bin Al Salman or whatever his name is, right? So when you're appearing on camera with him, when you're mentioning his name or things he has done, you are absolutely going out of your way to do much more than Carlos ever did. And also, Carlos was doing it as like a fucking shitpost, you idiots. He wasn't even making some sort of grand, like, political statement. In fact, I don't even know that since then he's ever done business with these people publicly or in any capacity, and it was never about esports. But you all wigged out over that and literally ejected one of the people who built modern esports. So yes, when you then associate yourself with MBS, that is even harder to swallow. That is even more detestable because you're the ones who set that fake standard. Like, I'd love to know if your Team Liquid, were you one of the orgs that were doing the pressure behind the scenes that G2 should be punished? By the way, we all know as well, you're such a bitter little fox in the industry. You also did do that because he was beating you. He was beating you in the game. He was getting you players. He was beating you in marketing. So what you thought was like, nah, let's get together on some mean girl shit and pretend it's about human rights. And then you just go and on camera, you shake the hand and metaphorically, don't do it for real. You could end up in a prison, getting executed. Kiss the arse of MBS. Well done, guys. Well done.
Well, so many of those issues, like you say, were basically the political issues were wielded by as cudgels by people in the industry simply to bludgeon people that they didn't like. And they didn't like Carlos because Carlos was very successful. And G2 was the premier team in Europe and arguably the Western world. And people were...
All you need to know about these people is think about how they fucking sabotage Chris Badawi with the fake poaching bullshit.
Yeah.
Right. And that was all predicated on the fact they thought he was going to be bankrolled by Martin Shkreli. So what do you think they would do to Carlos?
Money from evil Martin Shkreli to come in the industry. Bloody hell. Oh, that was fucking outrageous. Yeah.
So, yeah. And now that this money is here, people are entirely okay with it and turning a blind eye. And
and then just as a punchline, I don't know if we're going to mention it in this episode, as if to make the punchline even more delicious, the one thing that you're supposed to be able to go, well, at least I got the bag. Look up whether EWC actually even paid you the fucking bag. Some of you dickheads didn't even get your bag yet 1 year later. You've had to put up with 1 year of us telling you you're a piece of shit. You morally sold out everything to the devil, and the devil hasn't even coughed up. He's going, sorry, mate, tell you what, I've got a bunch of other people to pay this blood money to. I'll get to you real soon, though. ESL's still on that shit. So, by the way, I'm just going to put this out there. If you're the people who ever complain about any other TO, you're not going to complain about these people not paying you. The whole industry is just fucking frauds, mate. It's mental.
So
well, actually, on that note, there's been a number of like little things as well that just haven't been talked about. Like for the Dota competition, they ran like some fucking Arcana giveaways that people were complaining about on Reddit that never got paid.
Oh, right.
Obviously, we know as well, like people have been waiting months to get the money in some instances, and it's like, yeah, no, bro. People don't call out. Well, they never called out ESL before they were owned by the Saudis. So,
yep,
certainly not going to be doing it now, right?
Yeah. And as I've always said, the reason that's so gross is because ESL are shameless, mate. They'll turn around and talk about how they're leading the industry. Bro, I could lead a fucking sector too if I can just have unlimited liquidity by never paying anyone, but all of my rivals must pay on time or they get outed by the media, including people you have indirect connections with. That's called a fucking rigged system. Like, in that scenario, how are we supposed to have real competition? Like, at the end of the day, you have to actually pay people to do the jobs. That's the bare minimum the industry should expect. The bare minimum.
So I do want to talk about, now that we've covered some of the updates on what Saudi has done and how it has not actually changed in any meaningful way, shape, or form, and in some ways has gotten significantly worse, to how much are they going to affect esports in the future? And the answer to that is, well, now they've convinced the International Olympic Committee to give them the Esports Olympics, whatever the fuck that means, for the next 12 years. Now, this was supposed to happen this year in 2025. It has now been delayed until 2027 for mysterious reasons.
Mm-hmm.
But I do want to share this quote with you guys when the Saudis got this. So this is the president of the International Olympic Committee, as in the guy in charge of all of the Olympics. Thomas Bach commented, "We are very fortunate to be able to work with the Saudi NOC, which is their Olympic committee, on the Olympic Esports Games, because it has great, if not unique, experience in the field of esports with all its stakeholders. The Olympic Esports Games will greatly benefit from this experience. By partnering with the Saudi NOC, we have ensured that the Olympic values are respected, in particular with regard to game titles on the program, the promotion of gender equality, and engagement with the audience, which is embracing esports." Now, I don't even know what to say to that. How could you possibly say that a Saudi governing body is, with an event that is going to take place for 12 years in Saudi Arabia, is going to respect gender equality?
You want to know how I know as well that like everyone's really squeamish about the implications of that? It's because I've been told multiple times, by the way, that what MBS really wants, right, is that he wants to have the female tournaments out there. That
Game
they were very
changers
keen
for
on having
Valorant.
game changes from Valorant, but also they want to do the finals for ESL Impact in Riyadh. And this has been floated a number of times internally at ESL, and there are executives associated with that product, not at the very high end, but kind of middle management, that have said absolutely not, because we've got a number of trans competitors, with some women who might not want to attend in Riyadh, and so they've pushed back on it internally. But be absolutely under no illusion, 26, that's going to happen. There will be, certainly by 27, there's going to be a significant female esports tournament. I mean, they've already done the Mobile Legends Bang Bang one as well. But there's going to be significant female tournaments that like our FPS audience will be familiar with, and the finals are going to be held in Riyadh. And by the way, if they still push back and refuse, they'll simply create one. It's kind of insane how much influence they've got over the industry and what it's going to do. And like I said, here's the thing: if you're pushing back against that internally, why? Why, if it's all fine? Why would you?
No, I agree. The weirdest thing to me is this. If what they're doing is acceptable, why do we have to do this gradual tiptoe? Let's just go straight there. Let's have all the women's events, ESL Impact, to take place in Riyadh tomorrow. All transgender athletes go there. Everyone wear pride flags. Remember, you're telling me all these things are all okay. You're also saying you've also communicated to all the people that's totally okay for Westerners to behave differently than in Saudi Arabia. So logically, they could go there and be gay while they're openly. They could all hold hands, case to it, all those things. No. You all know that is not what is acceptable and that you have to present a facade that is possible. I'll even give you an example, Richard, of how it will never end. The people who virtue signal will never stop doing it. So the other day, I saw people do what you would actually think has stopped now, which is you'd think, well, people had really slow their roll on the whole Trump thing. Oh, no. In Counter-Strike, the other day, literally this week, there was a whole story about how Trump administration potentially cripples ESL Impact. And it was the thing, Monty, where supposedly within the visa rules now, if you apply to go to America, for example, to play in a sport, but you essentially, they would say, lie about what your biological reality is, like whether you were a man at birth and you say, I'm a woman, for example, because you're transgender and you plan on competing in ESL Impact, not only would you be denied a visa, you would actually be banned for life, was actually the ruling in the stipulation. I don't know how this will play out. Obviously, it's just been something that's just been put in now via executive order. So when this happened, right, there were for real, part of the takes that were upvoted on Reddit were going, wow, when Saudi Arabia is lapping you on women's issues, it's like, no. Just because Saudi Arabia doesn't. The joke is they don't ban that, you dickhead. It was never allowed in their country, you fucking imbecile. Like that. You're so mental that you're doing what they're doing with their drive now. You're taking one area where it just doesn't appear as bad and going, that makes you better than America. It's like in no fucking universe. And by the way, here's the other difference. Notice some people will have a massive public reaction to that happening in America or even being proposed, whereas none of you people will ever say anything about what happens in Saudi Arabia. In fact, a lot of you in the first 30 minutes just discovered what is happening there. You've never ever heard it in the meantime, even though you've heard Saudi Arabia, Public Investment Fund, ESL Facebook Group, and Esports World Cup said 8 million fucking times via signal noise for the last 4 years. But you never heard any of that shit about what goes on there with women and people being 8 years old, put in prison, etc. So, no, sadly, that is never going to end, mate. People are still going to keep playing this political shell game of like, in this one area, isn't? Don't you think Trump is the worst one than the MBS? Like, that's not even funny, guys. Like, that wouldn't even be a bad.
It just shows the sports washing is working.
Right? Yeah,
it just shows that it's working.
You're right. Yeah, it works like a motherfucker, mate.
It's working great. And
spoiler before you go, Richard literally would speak out. He probably has a video on that fucking topic coming at me. That's exactly the sort of thing he has always spoken out about consistently. Some would say to a fault.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're going to now talk about
my bank manager would say it to a fault.
Absolutely. Yeah,
so
exactly.
I'm sure as more details about this Esports Olympics are announced, there's no details yet. The only thing we know is that the International Olympic Committee has given this, and by given I mean sold it, to the Saudis for 12 years. There aren't any games announced. There's no information about it. It just is there. They allude to...
Here's the thing, Monty. At least they are just shameless, though. They really are on that Simpson shit. Like, oh, my laundry is ready. Thank you. Like, and that's what I love about like FIFA, the IOC. They just actually are the ones, like, remember, they're all boomers. They're just like, look, I had a meeting in a cafe and then I left with a different suitcase. And I mean, think this is an excellent place to
World Cup's going to be in Saudi in 2030, right?
At least they have sort of a brazenness how they do it, Monty. In esports, we're trying to pretend we're doing the right thing. That's the worst part.
Yeah. So I do want to talk about the Riot stuff because really, as guilty as other people are and other companies are, Riot has now entered into a uniquely fucked up relationship with the Saudis that is not mirrored so far by any of the other companies. Also, a company called
Riot Games partners with a country in which you cannot have a riot in any possible context. Like, you'll go to prison and get killed. So again, a bit too on the nose for me, but keep going.
So first off, though, our sponsor for this episode is ExpressVPN, and you may be wondering to yourself, when would I use a VPN? Well, you know, guys, if I was going to a country like Saudi Arabia or China, I would want to use a VPN because my security would be pretty important in those places. And may I remind you that your internet service provider actually does get the data of everything you are looking at if you are not using a VPN, which if you're in Saudi Arabia would be the Saudi ISP you are using, which they 1000% use to spy on people within that country to then arrest them for the crimes we have been discussing. So security, pretty important. And ExpressVPN, they don't keep any of your data. They just delete it off of their memory instantly. So here you go. I would use that. And it works for other things too. If you guys follow along with us on our show Foreplay, where we discuss films, you can use it to access different countries' iterations of Netflix, which have a ton of different movies in their catalogs. Very useful. And it's also been rated #1 VPN by top tech reviewers like CNET and The Verge. And you can use it on your phone. You can use it on your laptop. You can use it on your tablet. You can use it on your desktop, obviously. It's just one click and it gets you. They've got servers all over the world. It's extremely useful. I use it literally all day, every day on my phone now because I'm on a lot of public Wi-Fi networks here in Korea. You guys secure your online data today by visiting expressvpn.com/horsemen. That's expressvpn.com/horsemen, plural. And you can get an extra 4 months free. expressvpn.com/horsemen.
Right, Monty, I'm glad you did that very corporate ad read there, because I actually have something I'd like to say. Guardest thy thoughts, they become actions, and actions leadeth thee to ruin, whence undisciplined they be. Thieves, brigands, and churlish louts abound, seeking, sneaking, peeking at your most precious data, to sell abroad and damage you they would. Keep safe from prying eyes, and this advice prioritize. One button's all you need, so this ad I briefly read. So hearken now to heed my call. Phones, tablets, and more, it works on all. To guard what matters to you with the ferocity of the ancient Norsemen, the magic words to gather such protection, expressvpn.com/horsemen. But enough talk from me and my esteemed colleagues, you see. With ExpressVPN, you'll get an extra 4 months for free. expressvpn.com/horsemen. There you go.
Beautiful. I particularly appreciated the Norsemen with horsemen rhyme.
Yeah.
that was my favorite
Listen,
part.
there's not many things actually rhyme with horsemen, unfortunately. You know?
It was good. Now, what's not good? What's not good is
Okay, great segue.
Riot Games, as usual, not good. But especially when they issue blog posts. By the way, I will point this out that they didn't put this on like
honestly, one thing I do appreciate is that like if you actually did go back 10 years, we were somewhat whiling about very minor things Riot Games did, like, you know, make the format not very good or rules. Like at the time, everyone was like, you're making them out like the bloody evil with all bodies stacked behind the butt. Listen, again, it's like that Doublelift one again, isn't it? Like, well, they'd have to like come and out themselves for doing all this shit. Like, I don't make fucking the world go the way it goes, but I tell you what, they've made us look way better than we even were back then, mate. Like, we were just nitpicking some minor shit. Now they actually are just working with actual like despotic people who murdered like 8-year-old kids and stuff. Like, fucking hell.
Yep. And just flying to Saudi to chill with them too, which we'll get to.
I know.
So, you know, what's interesting is that they released this on riotgames.com, their news blog on riotgames.com, which, by the way, nobody looks at.
I wasn't even aware that was a website. I've never heard of that website before.
So it's literally on their corporate website. Did they put it on lolesports.com, you know, where they tell all the esports fans of League of Legends to go? No. Did they put it on their Valorant web? No. They just put it on riotgames.com/news, where everything goes to die. So why we're returning to the Esports World Cup with League, TFT, and Valorant, because they have, of course, nobody actually wrote this, by the way. This is nobody's real opinion.
That's also my favorite thing. Whenever it says, and by the way, same Monty, you'll notice with the very badly written puff pieces on RS Gaming, it's never written by a person. It's written by RS Gaming. This is written by like LOL Esports or Riot Games. Yeah, it's never, there's no human. By the way, here's a giveaway that you're doing some evil shit. When you can't even say, I am the mouth of Sauron, you have to just go, just by Mordor. Mordor's putting out a statement like, bro, you can't even put your name on the thing you're writing. That's how heinous it is. By the way, if I actually work with something, I promote gambling, for example, I put my name on it. I think there is no moral qualm against that. I wouldn't recommend people do it if they have a issue with like addiction or something like that. But the point is, I put my name on that shit. Like, it shows to me when you, again, if you're not doing anything wrong, what's the problem in putting your name on it? Bro, go ahead and be proud of your work. You work for Riot Games. By the way, do you know how many people, Monty, have fought for decades to get bylines on articles at publications and not have your boss take all your credit, etc.? Magically, that goes out the window when we're doing these puff pieces, I notice. When we're just shilling for the evil companies, suddenly no one wants to put their name on it. Weird, that, isn't it? I thought this was your career, guys.
So we get here and they say, let's start with the basics. We're granting a license to the EWC for League, TFT, and Valorant for the next 3 years. As part of this agreement, you'll also see limited ads for the Esports World Cup, as well as an esports tournament, including in Riyadh season later this year during our global tournaments, starting with Masters Bangkok for Valorant.
By the way, Monty, they're even immediately doing a little trick with PR there, where when they say limited ads, again, why are you saying it like that? Why not just say ads? We all know, by the way, an ad is limited by definition. It doesn't take over the whole broadcast. Doesn't just become like the next 1 hour segment. What you're doing in this PR statement is you're trying to make it sound like this, Monty. We're going to do exactly what we're going to do anyway, but let's make it sound like we're not really doing it quite that bad and we're limiting it. And you know what? I understand you might have concerns, so we're not going to totally give it all away immediately. Like you're just playing the silly game again.
Every time it reveals that they are aware of everything we're talking about.
Absolutely.
Why does it need to be limited?
Exactly.
Why does it have to be a logo in the bottom of the screen?
Yes.
Why won't your talent do an ad read?
It says immediately that placement's similar to what you see from other global esports sponsors. So if it's just another sponsor, why do we have to make this blog post? If it's just the same.
If I announce tomorrow, right, I'll make up a random company, because sadly now a lot of these companies might want to sponsor the last 3 days. That's just how it works. So, all right, Glog fucking Drink Incorporated. If I was announcing record-breaking new deal with the LTA and Glog, I wouldn't go, they'll only be featured in limited ads though. I'd go, welcome Glog to the family.
Yeah, exactly.
You're going to be seeing them in ads. Yeah, exactly, Monty. You'd never use that about something you were proud about. You would brag about working with these people.
Right. And they say, like, the feedback they got from players and teams who participated last year was positive.
Sound.
And also, by the way, they were very explicit last year as we went over on this show. But in case you didn't know, for League of Legends, they said, well, the Saudis are going to do this international event, but we're not actually supporting it. But also internally, they sent out messages telling all of their leagues to stop for the Esports World Cup, so that nothing was happening during this time, so teams could go. So they carved out a calendar for it, and they have to help because somebody has to run the tournament server, so they have to have network personnel at least on call, but obviously somebody was there in case something happened, and they have to give them access to the tournament realm. And on top of that, they gave them the API that they use for LCS, the North American League. So they were actively supporting the Esports World Cup. So that was a complete fucking fabrication. They were there. They had staff on it. They got paid, obviously. They were giving them resources. They carved out the calendar. They did everything to enable it and then said, oh, no, we're not doing anything here. So this year, they're coming back and they're saying, well, we're also going to advertise on all of our esports broadcasts for the Esports World Cup. And it's going to be rotating logos on the games, just like every other sponsor. Video ads between matches, just like most of, if not all of their current sponsors as well. So they're adding Valorant, which people hoped that wouldn't happen. League of Legends is coming back. TFT is very minor. TFT was there last year, I believe. So basically, they also say, moving forward, we'll continue to open the door for more third-party tournaments worldwide, complementing our existing global schedule. Well, why didn't you used to do this, Riot? You used to do this in like 2014, 2015, but then you stopped because it was super important that no one else had access to these events. So why is it that now the Saudis are the ones who made you change your mind, even though, let me remind you, it's still the same ESL people who are producing those events. Many of those same people are still there. So why was it not okay in 2017, but it is okay in 2024 with the same company that got bought by the Saudis? Oh, right. It's just money. It's just money. And this also obviously contradicts the Neom partnership that LEC had that we alluded to earlier, which in 2020, Neom, the alleged very modern city that was being built in very unethical ways by indentured servants and slave labor and kicking/killing the people who lived on that land, kicking them off or killing them. And the people at Riot, not only the casters, the broadcast talent, but also Riot employees rose up against Riot and said, no, this is not acceptable. And this is exactly the same deal where it is a Saudi-funded sports washing exercise to appear on their broadcasts and to advertise Esports World Cup. So this is what they're doing now, and they've just added Valorant to it.
I mean, the expansion of the games is also like very instructive as well, because it's like it shows that they were not just wholly satisfied with how the tournament went. but like they're wholly satisfied with their business dealings across the board, and now they're even willing to do things that historically Riot have identified as being against their own business interests. Like, are they really gonna fucking like right? The Esports World Cup is now a bigger Dota event than TI in terms of prize pool. It's the biggest Dota event on the calendar by design because that's the one fucking team that Falcons have put together that actually works. Like, so, you're going to have all of Riot Games adjacent to all of Valve's games, including the direct head-to-head they expressly forbade in the past. Of Dota and League of Legends.
So to put this in context, back when Riot was actually involved with ESL, Riot told them that Dota and League of Legends couldn't be at the same events or even on the same circuit. So League of Legends was for Intel Extreme Masters, and ESL had to create an entirely new tournament circuit called ESL 1 to house
which
Dota.
They still deny they did to this day, which is pathetic. It's pathetic. Because we all know what you did.
By the way, the joke is, I'll even give you the obvious meme, I'll make fun of myself. The reason why ESL intentionally compartmentalized, Monty, is because by having ESL 1, they could do Dota, but if you don't know, it used to be called EMS 1, and it was intentionally the second circuit, the below one for the not as big games. So they elevated it by going ESL 1, big prestige brand, and it allowed them to work with people that otherwise they couldn't work with, such as Dota for ESL 1, and me, because the joke is I couldn't work with IEM, so it literally was almost like the fucking hall of villains on this side to work with ESL 1 that we have to pretend on the sanctimonious IEM side we don't work. No, that really is. That was quite clearly a very cynical move, Monty. Yeah.
So before this was actually impossible, but now it is possible.
The only thing that could bring together League of Legends and Dota is filthy, dirty, blood-ridden Saudi money. Well, there, you know what? Congratulations, esports. You've done it again. You've done it again.
And not only
you never
that,
let me down. You never let me down.
You know, there's also been, despite Riot saying that everything is limited and like them trying to make these protestations, there have been a lot of very secretive trips by Riot executives over. I'll bring up a tweet right now that was made by James Fudge, the reporter who runs the Esports Advocate, where in the bottom right corner, you may recognize a man with the same bewildered expression that you saw at the end of the League of Legends World Finals this year, where he looked like a deer in the headlights on LSD shitting himself on stage. And that is Chris Greeley, who is the head of all of LoL Esports. Now, he was at a new global sport conference in Riyadh that was not announced anywhere. And this was only leaked because somebody put this up on LinkedIn who was at the conference. But there's no mention of all of these Riot executives flying back and forth from Riyadh. Why is he there? Here's a question. If Riot doesn't want to be hands-on, they just want to give this license over, why are they flying out there in August of last year to attend these conferences? Surely that is not necessary. What benefit does Riot gain from sending their esports executives to this event if they're just like, okay, you do your own thing?
In their country, you don't even have to go in person to apply to marry a child. You can just do it online. Why does Riot have to fly there just to have a fucking convo? Skype just closed down, my bad. Discord, that exists. Google Meets. Also, just as a little aside, because everyone tells me this guy's great, top right-hand corner, Joe Marshall T1, of course. Tell you what, mate, don't ever tell me about how like outrageous the behavior of agents in Korea is. Tell you what's really outrageous, the people cutting people's heads off that you're on camera with, dickhead. Yeah. That's just shot across the bow, nothing to do with the episode. Keep going back to the Riot thing.
But you know, in T1's case, they are a partner team, so I understand why they're there. I don't agree with it, but the question is, if Riot isn't trying to gain deeper ties with Saudi Arabia, they don't need to be sending people out there. They can simply just say, okay, you just run this tournament and we're going to sign this contract. Here you go. Like, it's very clear that their relationship is just getting deeper and deeper and deeper, and that this is extremely deliberate.
There's two reasons to go out there in person. Obviously, the first and the most obvious is to discuss other potential business dealings.
Which, by the way, this was August of last year. So what they were discussing was this deal we are talking about right now.
Yes. Yeah, and I mean, not only that though. I mean, like you are gonna see other deals. being made for the expansion specifically into the Middle East. Now, what will that look like? Well, I know in the past, for instance, that they've like talked about like avatars and stuff like this in the game. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of like earnings potential in League of Legends because the client's shit, the game is shit, the game is old, and Riot are really fucking miserly with how what opportunities they put out there for their business partners. Although I will say, I guess they will be open to change mysteriously for Saudi. So
Well,
anyway,
also, I would say that, if you were going to add those kind of things into the game, the Jelibia only offers one silhouette. So it would make really distinguishing between characters very difficult when you're actually trying to play the game.
fair. But anyway, like that's one part of it. But do you want to know what the other part is? And this is how pathetic the average esports executive is. If I don't go to Saudi, I don't get to live my little rock star fantasy. I don't get met at the airport by a delegation. I don't get to fucking go to like the opulent palace and have the fucking, all the exotic spread where it's like, Ferrero Rocher being brought round on a fucking silver platter, right? Like, I don't get that. And it's the one time in my shit, sad life I'm ever going to get that. So it doesn't really matter that I'm essentially stepping on the bones of children and the LGBT community and women's rights activists. Because look at look where I am. I've made it. And that's why they're out there. That's why Mark Merrill flies out there introducing himself as a TV executive. It's as pathetic and tawdry as it sounds.
Well, also, I mean, Riot is paying these people's wages to go out there. So they're either telling them or they're approving of this. And, when they say they're not involved, they are literally paying people's salaries and time to be at these events. So they are paying for it. Right. And they view this as a very valuable business relationship because they know, we've talked about this, but on a long enough timeline, the assumption is that the Saudis are going to start taking over more of Riot's esports. Will they take over the domestic leagues? Will they take over more of these international events? They say they're going to be doing more third-party international events. Are those just more ESL events? You know what I mean? And here's the way that the Saudis wield the cudgel. They say, well, we're going to pay you, for the Esports World Cup. We know that's hard for you guys in Riyadh. So we're going to pay you $10 million for the license to this event. But if we're going to pay you that $10 million, we got to pay you just the $1 million so we can get this other event on the IEM. But it's a package deal. I mean, otherwise it just doesn't happen, guys.
You want to know the other aspect to this, and it was essentially revealed in Mikhail Klementov's reporting, who, by the way, he's done really good work around this, and good to see that there is like at least a very small coalition of journalists that are continually speaking up about these issues, him being one of them. But it is now baked into if you're talent for Riot Games, it is now baked into the clauses in your contract that, as you said earlier, the anti-sideshow clause. You cannot speak about anything political. You can't make videos about anything political or anything contentious. Riot Games have wanted to codify that since they began, but there's never been a predicate for it. Because if I say to you, look, can you stop talking about politics, and you go, but the election's on, Trump's gonna win, democracy dies in darkness, my fascism, they go, fucking hell, the optics of us shutting that down would be really bad. Even though it's still inconvenient because, as Michael Jordan famously said, Republicans buy sneakers too, right? Well, now they've got carte blanche to do it. The Saudi Arabian state has given Riot Games permission to put in that clause because it's like, look, we got millions riding on this, billions riding on this, and also it's their culture. What are you, some sort of bigot? So yeah, we're just gonna add this little clause to your contract, and don't you ever speak up about it ever again. And this is the wet dream. This is the actual wet fucking dream for Riot Games. It is exactly what they wanted, and now they get to do it.
They've been wanting to do that. So right after the Free Hong Kong stuff came out in Hearthstone, Worlds was in China that same year. And what Riot did was they actually put the entire broadcast on a multi-minute delay so that if anybody said anything in an interview, they could pull the plug before it actually hit the air. They did that because they were afraid somebody was going to say Free Hong Kong on the Worlds broadcast.
Oh,
So,
and also, by the way, if you don't know, people always say that thing of like, oh, well, Riot doesn't get controlled by China. At this last Worlds, when it was looking like BLG and all Chinese team was going to win Worlds, so if you listen carefully on the broadcast, and it was implied behind the scenes, this was actually communicated to people, they had to refer to Knight, the player who would have won as a mid laner, that this was the first time an LPL Chinese mid laner had won. And the reason why there, Richard, is because in Season 2, when Taipei Assassins with Toys won, that wouldn't have been cut. They would consider that a Chinese mid laner winning. So to make it so that people couldn't, well, actually, they were even overtly using this really stilted language. By the way, I've never heard that language used ever on a broadcast before. I only noticed myself when someone afterwards said, if you notice, they always said LPL Chinese mid laner. That's on our Western broadcast, guys. Like, not even the one going out to the Chinese. Like, we aren't even ourselves allowed to entertain the thought of something that China considers not to be real.
Yep.
That's just that's influence right there.
Yep.
I am going to bring up Mikhail Klementov's article because it's very interesting. And what he got was insider sources from the Riot talent to talk about a town hall that Riot had the day they made the announcement about the advertisement of the Saudi sports washing onto these people's domestic leagues, because they knew that, because especially the European casters who rebelled last time against the Neom deal, that they had to just crush this as fast as they possibly could. And so here we go. And we're going to talk about some of the issues of this. But also, you know, he says whether talent will be penalized for speaking out or creating content critical of the Esports World Cup or Saudi Arabia. On the call, Riot's representatives stressed that broadcast talent would not be compelled to participate in the new partnership, which means, by the way, that they wouldn't have to do the ad reads. It would be commercials in between. In the commercial breaks, they'd run videos, and it would be on the overlay, the rotating logo, but they don't actually ever have to say EWC yet.
Yep.
So this is how they get them.
Which even then, by the way, how often did they even do ad reads on LEC? So you know what I mean? It was like, what?
I mean, it would be like
about eight. Almost
I think probably like
right?
the Red Bull Baron power play or stuff like
so the
that.
odd one, sure.
You know, it could have been integrated into the game somewhat, but this is how they get them, is that this time they don't have to do that. Next year, they'll have to do that, right? And they'll be like, well, it doesn't really matter. It's just one more thing. This is how the sports washing is so insidious and it works, is it the creep, the scope creep just continues and continues and continues forever. They said, participation in the Esports World Cup is entirely optional and won't impact hiring decisions around official Riot-run Valorant events. Well, here's the thing. If the ESL and the Saudis eventually take over the whole circuit, then your lack of participation will hurt you eventually as a freelancer. So if you want to continue your career, you better fucking do it. Yep. And basically, Riot also said that some people said that Riot had introduced clauses to their contracts in 2025 prohibiting the creation of content with social or political commentary or content that disparages Riot sponsors, of course, which is now the Esports World Cup. And then they said talent, they clarified this to the reporter that said talent contracts are related to their work during broadcast. How they choose to engage on their channels outside of their work with Riot is completely up to them. Now, I can just tell you that this isn't true because I never criticized Riot on Riot's broadcasts. What I did was I used my own social media, my own YouTube channels, my own content to criticize Riot. And when I was told explicitly when I was banned from owning a team that it would not affect my ability to be hired at international events for Riot Games, the very next event, which was Worlds in 2016, I was not given an offer for. So, and by the way, it's still the same people who did that to me. They are still there at Riot Games. So it's not a change of leadership. In fact, those people are now higher in the hierarchy. So it is complete bullshit for them to tell them that, oh, it doesn't matter what you say. It's only for the broadcast. No, because Riot is extremely vindictive and the people there are vindictive and they absolutely will do this. They absolutely will pull you from the broadcasts, despite what they say. This is the way that they do it so that they have plausible deniability, right? And if you don't do these things, or if you do criticize it, you are fucking up your potential whole future as they continue to give more and more of the circuit over to the Saudis over time. So that's where this is.
As I alluded to earlier, The reason why that creep is so insidious is because if you just do it step by step, eventually it doesn't even seem unreasonable that you do just rout and purge anyone who won't eventually actively go along with this and say the words. Because what you do is you don't say right at the beginning, right, I'm getting some of your favorite casters, but you're against the wall. What's your decision? Live or die, metaphorically. And then if you say live, you get to do the read and you get to continue on. But otherwise, you leave now. Outrage across the industry. Wow, you've got rid of some of my favorite casters and talents because they won't do this. Oh, well, no. What you do instead is like, we won't make anyone read out the ads. Then next year, it turns out some people do want to read the ads. So they'll start reading the ads. Oh, next year, what's that? I've only hired the people who read the ads. Like, it's just such an obvious way to do it. And the worst thing is, it's so clearly set up, that dreaded term, to manufacture consent, to make people think, because you've only done tiny incremental changes, it's not that unreasonable. Like, by the way, even if I think economically, yeah, it doesn't make sense if I have a bunch of people who will do an ad read and they have a bunch who won't do an ad read, and the ad read's what funds the broadcast. How am I going to keep employing the ones that won't do the ad read? Like, it's actually just a really clever, insidious way to get into people's brains and push the levers that make them think, well, I guess you have to do that. And that's all. And the whole point is you don't. This is a choice. And even worse, as we've been making this the theme of the whole episode, this is clearly what your game plan is going into step one. You're not changing between the steps and go, well, now I need you to do the ad read. You're actually reverse engineering it, Richard, from like, eventually I'm going to need everyone to just basically say the words and hold up the sign and say, I love Saudi, metaphorically. So instead, how do I reverse engineer from that so it's not as crazy? I push these people out the industry.
I mean, look, I said this at the start because I've watched Saudi Arabian takeovers of other sports. I'm a sports person, sports writer, like that's the shit. It was what brought me to esports, essentially. And so I've watched what they've done in other sports, and I told everyone on day one, this is going to be a total monopoly, a total takeover of esports as you know it, by design, because that's the only way Saudi Arabia thinks about things. So let's be clear, right? This is what you're up against now, today, as in what we weren't up against, 3 years ago. You want to work in esports tournament, all of the big ones are pretty much controlled by Savvy or one of their partners by extension, right? So that's even if you want to get out of bed and just do your job as a host, an analyst, commentator, whatever it might be, an interviewer. So that's that, right? Then, okay, so you have to do that. Then, if you want a puff piece written about you or any form of coverage or, whatever for the job that you do, well, it's going to be done by a friendly outlet, and they're only going to talk about the things that are relevant to their interests. And by the way, if you're an iconoclast, you're just never getting that coverage. It's like you don't exist. Then if you want an award and recognition for the things you do, well, yeah, we got the awards as well, by the way. And the only people winning awards are going to be people who have some sort of tangential tie to Saudi. Hey, everyone, Falcons, Organization of the Year, stand up, applaud, MBS.
And anybody who criticizes them will no longer be viable candidates. They just eliminated the Journalist of the Year award. And Last Free Nation, who has been previously nominated for awards, despite growing 35% year over year, was somehow no longer a candidate for the same award. Interesting.
So you have to understand that, like, if I want to do these things, then basically, like, if I want to have any form of career now in esports and have the things that you would expect to have, you just can't without it being linked to Saudi. If you say anything bad about Saudi, kiss goodbye to positive coverage, kiss goodbye to awards, kiss goodbye to work. Now what do I do inside the non-Saudi void? You don't do anything. You simply do not exist. And so this is what people are ultimately being faced with here. It's an existential question. It's one, do you want to exist in esports or not? And so, listen, I've got some sympathy about it if people then decide to walk back earlier statements and try and exist within that framework. You have to own up to it. You have to do the mea culpa, but ultimately it's not something I would do. I mean, I think the morally right thing to do is obviously to stand up and say, no, we will not allow this. Because, and as we'll get to in the final part of the podcast, have you noticed how the Olympic stuff is all long-term, 12 years, but the esports stuff is 3? There's going to be a world, guys, where you want to come back to and interact with the people that didn't sell out. And I hope, I know this won't happen because there's no justice in esports, but I hope that you are resoundingly rejected. I hope everyone laughs at your face. I hope you can't raise a dime. I hope you have to sell your esports organizations. And I hope you have to fuck off and just enjoy the rest of your days trying to tell yourself that it's okay to spend that money. That's what has to happen. And by the way, there is a chance that some of that will happen because Saudi is starting to already, the penny's already starting to drop. That they do not, under any circumstances, need to keep pumping vast amounts of money into the esports
They basically
thing.
are pressuring ESL to run not at a profit, but at least not lose money by next year.
Also,
Yes.
if you ever set it up, which obviously is one of their end goals, to have, whether through influence or direct ownership, a monopoly, it's actually a very, very famous monopolistic tactic that what you do is you put your rivals out of business by basically spending money. Like oftentimes you spend money to take a loss, like you make the cost of the project almost non-existent, so your rivals go out of business. Then the second you have the monopoly, you put the prices up. So the premise here would be you give the money, the bag early, Monty, to get people in the door. We'll have to do it for the bag. But the second you have full control and everyone's bent the knee, now you drop the rates. You become the indentured servant of esports in that analogy.
Yeah.
It's the only game in town.
And like I said, it's not going to last forever because put it this way, Savvy have already figured out mobile gaming is bigger than esports by magnitudes.
Yep.
And they're all the properties they're buying. They're on record publicly in one of their friendly publications saying, look, we might not invest in esports so much now. We don't really need to do it.
And here's the point, guys. EWC, Mobile Legends Bang Bang, was like the #1 viewed game. Second point, they own Scopely, which makes Monopoly Go, and they've made billions of dollars off of that. And thirdly, they are now allegedly attempting to purchase Niantic, which is the creator of Pokemon Go.
Yep. And by the way, I can't help but feel as well, all of the shenanigans that's gone on with StarLadder is either an attempt to build something up to then sell again to the Saudis, or it is Ralph Reichart creating an insurance plan for when the Saudi collapse occurs, because that's Indian investment money. And by the way, one of the things you have to understand about esports is they will always try and go into what they call these new emerging markets. And they always frame it as, oh, but there's fans over there that are being underserved and we can get out there and give them the esports dream. What they mean is numbers equal money. And we will pander to these regions, and which typically, by the way, we can exploit economically because we can pay people over there less money than we would pay, in other parts of the world. That's the game. That's what it's about. And so they do this, and, this is what they're doing in the Middle East. This is exactly what they're doing in the Middle East. And after the Middle East, it's going to be India again. And after India again, let's take another run at Brazil and see what we can do out there. And on and on and on it goes. So, look, there is a world where the Saudi ownership ends. We'll probably see it while we're still active in the space. Because Saudi wanted the Olympics. They didn't want this. It's just that they can buy it for chump change, so why not?
Okay, so I would encourage people to go check out Sideshow's video because he actually does the viewership breakdown, but he brings up some incredibly good points. And when it comes to what can actually be done about this, we've discussed this on episodes of the Four Horsemen before, but there are many actors here. We have the developers who own the intellectual property. We have the teams who are partnering with Saudi Arabia and who are sending their squads in order to compete at the Esports World Cup. We have the players, right? We have the talent who are going there to broadcast and also co-stream and appear, as celebrities, basically on behalf of, the Esports World Cup. Any other entities that I'm missing? I think that's pretty much it. The four.
I mean, an obvious other one you could do, listen, this is technically what Richard did, people don't think it through, is you could also, in theory, put pressure on sponsors of these teams and TOs that have nothing to do with Saudi Arabia and ask, you're actually indirectly associated with what's going on there, because if that was enough of a question mark as to which do we choose, then maybe that would potentially make people think otherwise. And also the reason why the game dev is the ultimate one to put pressure on is they have the golden goose that shits out the golden eggs. They don't actually even need the money. The question is, in the case of Riot, do they want the money? If they want the money, then that's very different, isn't it?
So I think, what's interesting is none of the devs, who are all multi-billion-dollar companies, need this extra however many millions of dollars it is, right? And they're doing it. What the devs are saying is, we're doing it because the teams want to do it, because the teams want to go, because they're the partner teams, even though they're partner teams with Riot or with the other developers who created these franchise leagues, or with ESL until this most recent year in Counter-Strike or on Valve projects. They're partners with them, but all of these entities have failed to monetize properly for the teams. They have failed to sell media rights. They have failed to sell major sponsorships. And so the financial distress, which was caused by the teams having to raise money, it was Activision Blizzard and Riot who forced them to raise money because they had these massive franchise fees and they wanted them to partner with sports teams and famous investors and everything like that for their own optics. Now, Riot and Blizzard both could have just cherry-picked who they wanted to work with, charged them nothing for those franchise fees, and then they wouldn't have had to take on major investment in order to basically become franchise partners. This was a choice that was made by Activision Blizzard, by Bobby Kotick, and it was a choice that was made by the leadership of Riot. And so now the teams are fucked, obviously. And for me, the teams, in spite of all the weird stuff that they've been saying, and obviously they're walking back of pride, as we talked about earlier, they are in somewhat of a bind because, as I mentioned, if this Dota tournament in Riyadh is so big, how do you sign a Dota team if you refuse to participate when the players are just going to say, well, that's millions of dollars in prize pool I can't compete for. Now I'm never signing with this team, right? Yeah. So they're more or less bound to participate as much as they can with the Esports World Cup, unfortunately. And that's by design, right? Yes. By creating this giant $60 million prize pool that is irresistible to the players, the Saudis have forced the team's hands in order to participate with it.
But what it shows me is how mealy-mouthed a lot of the fucking claims of, like, we will stop entanglement and all of this stuff from, like, the likes of Valve, who are nominally one of the better games developers out there. But, like, this is all entanglement at this point. Sure. Because when you understand how the Esports World Cup model works, right? We have a slush fund from the PIF. By the way, I love as well how the Esports World Cup always say we're not funded by the PIF. We're funded by this like other legally distinct entity that takes its money from the P. Like, fuck off. So anyway, they basically, to ensure that they have teams enter the Esports World Cup, they pay for the teams. Yep. They go to Heroic and say, right, you want to sign a Dota team? Here's $300,000. Will that cover it for the year? That'll cover a big chunk, right? So then Heroic go out and sign a South American Dota team.
Well, also they're competing against reigning Esports World Cup champions Falcons, who refuses to disclose their ownership, but it is almost certainly either the PIF or the Saudi royal family, one of those two things, or both. They're all the same shit anyway.
Yeah, of course it is. So it's like, to be clear, the totally legally distinct Esports World Cup entity that it definitely has nothing to do with ESL either, even though the purse strings are controlled exclusively by or Falcon, but even though the purse strings are explicitly controlled by the former founder of ESL, and they use ESL as an exclusive production company. By the way, I did hear a rumor, apparently like StarLadder might be producing an event for Riyadh under the StarLadder umbrella now, under this new relationship, but who even knows if that's true? Wouldn't surprise me. Anyway,
by the way, that would be outrageous if you consider who the people who run StarLadder are, where they're from, and their political opinions about who we can and cannot associate within esports. Just shows how everyone's for sale, mate. Just sad.
Yeah. Oh, of course. So anyway, we do that, right? And anyway, so the problem you've got there is like, I'm paying you to create a team to enter into my tournament, and then giving you money based on how you promote that tournament and where you finish in that tournament. And it's all, so I funded a team to enter into my own competition. And I've not just done that once, I've done that 32 times. I've done it 32 times across multiple games.
And I may be giving an unfair advantage in funding to our team, the Falcons, right? We may be giving them 10 times as much money, potentially.
Maybe.
Or inside information about which, part of this too is like, as Esports World Cup continues to add more games, they could be literally, if Falcons have similar ownership, which they almost certainly do, They could be giving Falcons inside information to sign the best players in advance of these announcements or them telling the partner teams.
Well, you saw all the chess fucking bullshit that they've been doing, where they're doing this like absolutely ridiculous, like kind of astroturfing of chess, where it's like, because it's in the Olympics and Saudi values the Olympics, what they've now done is they've now funded all these esports organizations to go and pick up chess players so they can enter into the 2 Saudi controlled tournaments, obviously the biggest of one being a view to the Esports World Cup down the road. So they are now, and they've all said, they all put out incredibly similar statements when they join these esports organizations, saying, oh, it's amazing and exciting to be here and to be part of this. Team Liquid are the best esports organization. I'm the best chess player. Chess is esports, by the way. The Esports World Cup they've made a public proclamation, guys. I don't know if you saw it. Chess is esports now. They drive now. Chess is esports now. These are just fundamental truths. You're going to have to accept, bigot. You're just going to have to live with that. Chess is esports, guys. Why? Saudi Arabia says so.
And Magnus Carlsen says so, and he's the most important chess player because he's with Team Liquid, an esports team.
Magnus Carlsen, by the way, got paid like a fucking insane amount to be an official ambassador for like the Esports World Cup, essentially, in the chess division. And he gets to compete in that tournament as well for Team Liquid. By the way, his checks all being signed maybe by Team Liquid in signature, but that money comes like, what are we doing, guys? This is like
also that guy who's the other famous person after Magnus Carlsen, the Hikaru Nakamura guy, who's also a really top chess player. When he joined one of these orgs, I actually showed this on Twitter. He's one of those people who himself in the past has done sort of things that were like, oh, Rofus is weird. What's going on with it? Like, and then you're just signing up immediately to think about all the things you said in the first half an hour that they're doing to women, mate. And by the way, if you're Magnus Carlsen and this guy, you also don't need the money. Come on. You guys you just print money with your job. You're even now like Twitch streamers, you're super famous. Like, you just want the money as well. Let's just be real. Stop saying you need the money. Admit you want the money. Because here's the difference. When you need something, you might do something regrettable out of desperation. When you want something, you did it because that was your desire.
So, and we'll get to this. Like, so here's the thing. I don't blame the teams. The leadership of the teams has a fiduciary duty to their boards and investors.
See, this is where we differ because I do blame the teams.
Richard, wait for it. Yeah. So I think the teams, they have been forced into this more or less because otherwise they cannot operate as top tier competitive esports teams because they need players in these circuits and they need players in these major games. Okay. But Richard, here's the big but. These people, as you say, are wealthy for the rest of their lives. They do not have to stay in positions of leadership with these teams and continue to make these deals. They could fucking leave. They could leave at any time. Most of these people have been around long enough for plenty of their stock to vest, plenty of their ownership to be maintained forever. They have plenty of other opportunities in their lives besides this, and yet they continue to stay. That to me is...
Let me explain why you're wrong. Let me explain why you're completely and utterly wrong. You see, they haven't been forced into this. They have been serially incompetent and have wasted investment after investment after investment, burnt sponsor after sponsor after sponsor, fucked over business partner after business partner after business partner. And yes, that includes the TOs, going all the way back to E-League when all these fucking disgusting American owners just wanted more and more and more and more, right? And then when there is nowhere left to hide, when we can't fudge the numbers, when we can't tell any more lies, who's left? Well, tyrannical regimes around the world willing to underwrite your busted business model. So they haven't been forced into it. They have brought themselves to this exact point by simple virtue of just being serially incompetent. There's other...
There was no way to run an esports team without taking on this investment, because the developers made them take on the investment to pay for franchise fees.
Yeah, but like that again. What I'm saying is that's all well and good. They had, right. Look, you give me an esports org tomorrow and you get some American dickhead, will never happen again, by the way, but you get some American dickhead who has believed the white paper that it is going to be the next big thing, and he's willing to write me an angel seeding investment of $20 million, which he will then re-up again inside of a year, and then we'll add another further $10 million in year two, in the second full year at the end of that, and then by year 3, he wants to see results. Right? When those results don't manifest and he pulls out, who's to blame? Me, right? I took the money. I got to invest the money. I got the blank check. I got to run the org. In that time, I didn't build any sustainable revenue streams. I didn't build any long-term business with any of the partners or peripheral stuff. I overpaid salaries to players.
There wasn't a choice.
There absolutely is always a choice.
No, because the board
gets
taken over, and they want to spend money because they want to buy more of your company because they think that this is going to be successful. They also only know competitive success, and when there's a feeding frenzy of all this money, it just creates a bubble where the players end up getting paid a lot of money because they want the investors want to see more competitive success.
Do you want to know what you can do? Here's how I know it's all bullshit, though, because it's like, right, the American owners think that way. American owner thinks, me want big sports team, me want best player, me want full trophy cabinet, me will pay anything for that. And so they do. And so they overpay the players. And that money, by the way, comes at that's the cost of future sustainability. You're not actually giving these people a salary. You are burning your investment money that you could use to build a sustainable business so you can have the trophy lift. That's what these American owners did. That is ultimately what they did. But here's the problem with that, right? I look at sustainable European organizations like ENTS, who they got deep runs in majors and millions in sticker money by good scouting. I look at MOUs. MOUs have they've just won a $400,000 prize pool. They just won Cluj-Napoca that I was at, right? Almost all of their players, with the exception of Spinks, were at some point someone else's academy player, right? And three of the Mouse core, I believe, came through their NXT project. So I know it can be done sustainable. And by the way, all of those players that just won that
trophy, those orgs,
something like $5,000 in 2023.
So first off, not everybody can use.
Underpaid. It was some of the most underpaid professional players in the world. And yet everybody knew they were good. They were being competitive in tournaments. They were having playoff runs. Why can't Americans do that, Monty?
Well, I would say to that basically not everybody can optimize that strategy because those teams will react.
Then guess what? Then your business fails and you go under.
And also a lot of these.
Are you a free market capitalist or aren't you?
A lot of these teams are also significantly larger and have much larger revenue and probably are much more sustainable. Like, I don't think Team Liquid is doing badly in terms of business right now.
No, well, that's the other aspect of it. They're always boasting about how life's just fucking peachy.
But they're, Team Liquid is an order of magnitude larger than these other esports orgs.
You choose the size of your business.
But they've been successful at that size.
No, right. They haven't been successful at that. If you need to take a handout from a tyrannical regime that is antithetical to all of your publicly stated values, that is not success, bro. That is not success, especially when it comes time to pay the piper.
What I think
failed as a business.
What I think the bind is that there are so many games that they have to be part of because of the size of the org that they are. It's not about the immediate money. It's about the fact that they can't run Dota divisions or Counter-Strike divisions and not be involved in the Esports World Cup because they can't sign players.
Now, I know what Richard's getting the point out here. What this is what people love to do with I'll give you the obvious one, but I'll make it abstract. Every single ethnic land dispute goes like this. My side is totally morally right and justified because I'm going to start the story at this exact arbitrary point. And from that point onwards, we were only responding and we never did anything wrong. Whereas the other side goes, aha, but if I start it just before, right after you did something, then my side is justified. So the point he's making making is this, Monty, is it's all well and good now when at the end you've all sort of got like public companies that have fiduciary responsibility and shareholders. By the way, if you don't know, that is literally the reason why Carlos would always have had to be punished. It wasn't about him being able to say, well, I dispute this, because essentially they could have like declared no faith and sued him and all sponsors. There's all sorts of shit could have happened. So basically, when you then did the first 15 years of all these companies in esports, in which you did a million deals that didn't go the pay-per-view route, didn't do things like actually have your own voice and have a partnership and a cartel against the TOs, etc. They waited until the very end to do these things in name only, in gesture only, and sometimes with the Nihums of this world, almost going out of their way to fucking sell the sheep to the fucking wolves. Like they let it all go to the very end, where at the very end, all they could do was accept a massive bag of money. I agree with you, Monty. Otherwise, the whole thing just folds and someone else takes the money. But the problem is, that's why it wasn't okay to make the moral compromise the first 15 times, to make the shitty little, this is the ultimate, like, all roads to hell are paved with good intentions. I know what Richard means.
My point is that I don't think they need the several $100,000 that, you know, some of the orgs might need it, but like, does G2 or Team Liquid need that pittance of money? No. What they need is they have
single org in the global top 10 Forbes valuation from 2022 is now trying to publicly justify a handout from the Saudi Arabian state.
No,
Which
I think
is it? Did you lie then, or are you lying now?
So I don't think they're trying to justify the buyout. I think they're trying to justify them going because they need to be able to field the best teams and best players. It isn't about the money. It's about being able to attract top talent. That's my...
No, but here's the thing as well. That doesn't even hold up to any basic scrutiny, because some of these organizations have took that money from Saudi Arabia and they have gone to regions where they have signed talent that it will not actually be competitive, but we will meet our contractual obligation to enter a team into the Esports World Cup and probably get to pocket some of that money on the side, because none of this is being audited, no matter what the Esports World Cup publicly tell you.
My argument for that is that it was probably a package deal where they had to field rosters in a variety of different games. And in order to, they are meeting via lip service the ability to field those rosters, but it also guarantees them a seat at the table in very important games where they actually need top talent in order to sell sponsors that are worth way more than the Saudis are offering them. I don't think for some of the bigger teams, this is a money play. That's my guess.
So why when they had $20 million of investment, why wasn't that enough to crack the nut? Like, when's it ever going to be enough? We're at the point now where
I think some of the teams did do so. I mean, it's some of the business succeeded and some of them didn't.
We're having government handouts from Saudi Arabia having to go to sustain these organizations. And as you say, they must compete in any sports washing endeavor they demand, because apparently if they don't, they won't be able to get good players anymore. Like, yes. Well, it's time to shut up the lemonade stand at that point, isn't it?
Well, that was my argument with why do you continue to run these teams? But yes.
Yeah.
No, I agree with you on that point.
Yeah, it's completely...
I mean, the joke is, if you actually do, like the fair version of what I said earlier, and you explain, here's the real reason, Richard, why I, as Team Liquid, have to take the Saudi money. Because I played Doublelift millions of dollars years earlier to play League of Legends for me, who doesn't play for me anymore, isn't even a club legend, and has nothing to do with my org. I just paid him over the odds, millions and millions of dollars. And so, yada, yada, yada. Now I have to take Saudi money, and Doublelift himself, that millionaire guy, also co-streams the event. Like, that's esports. That's esports. It's Chinatown, Richard. It's Chinatown.
So I do want to switch this over to the co-streamers, though, because I think Sideshow brought up a very good point, which is in his analysis of the Esports World Cup from ES Charts, which is kind of the industry standard at this point of viewership, which is that with Esports World Cup, over 40% of the viewership came from co-streamers. Now, where did they get these co-streamers?
The biggest people,
They paid them giant amounts of money in order to participate. In League of Legends, they literally flew Tyler1 and Thebausffs, who is now beloved as the top laner, major streamer, top laner of Los Ratones, who has gotten an immense viewership via Caedrel's Team Project. I mean, they were paying influencers in a variety of games. Scump in COD, who's a massive streamer. Nadeshot is like still on marketing material this year.
Wow.
He was
one of the faces of it.
He was one of the faces of it. He was co-streaming it. And the thing is that they pay all these people. In fact, we can look at Doublelift's tweets here, because this is very indicative of the co-streaming.
Oh, wait, I always know the podcast headed in the right direction when we say, let's review Doublelift's tweets.
I know,
Yeah,
he is just a generational dipshit. It is amazing. Also, you know, they paid
crazy.
XQC, a guy who got $100 million deal from Kick. They paid him to broadcast Overwatch, and he was almost all of the Overwatch viewership. So if he doesn't take the bag, Overwatch gets no viewership at the Esports World Cup. So generational dipshit Doublelift said in 2020, in response to the NEOM announcement, human rights violation hype, criticizing the NEOM deal, which is on your screen right now. Now, 4 years later, what does he say? It's happening. Inaugural Esports World Cup opening show is now live. I'm co-streaming the entire event. Here, there's his stream link. Hashtag EWC partner.
Yeah.
I mean, the
By the way,
co-streamers...
I'll tell you, here's something I'll tell you right now. I can't speak to some of the other people. I'm not certain with Doublelift, but if he's managed his core stream, like people I do know, Dom, LS, he is potentially set for life, Monty. This is a millionaire, mate. I mean,
Yes.
he tells stories on his stream, bro, about how, like, Lena had her car broken into and they stole, like, $6,000 in Chinese money because they don't even bother, like, changing that money because to them that's fucking, like, that's like me not bothering to pick the 10 pence coin out of the fucking, that annoying thing in the car where it goes in and you can't get it out. Like, that's how much money these people are tripping over with opulence, and they're going out their way to do this shit, mate. That's why I sort of agree with you, Monty. It's not even purely a money play. Some of this is like FOMO. It's like, I just want to be part of the games. The games. You just want to all be fucking part of that shit. You just need to be on broadcast for big events. Like, that's what these people are about, mate.
But this is the reversal. Publicly criticizing NEOM and then accepting money to do the same sports washing yourself. Tyler 1 is set for life. Tyler 1 just had a daughter and is in Saudi Arabia sports wash. He doesn't need this money. Thebausffs doesn't need this money. Scump doesn't fucking need this money. XQC doesn't need this money. And yet they are taking it. If all of these people stopped co-streaming, and by the way, credit to people like Kadril and Dom in the League of Legends side who explicitly did not take this money, because you better believe, obviously they were asked, guys. Who wouldn't ask Kadril to co-stream the league? They tried to give Kadril the fucking bag. He obviously said no. Shout out to Kadril, okay? But like...
Which, by the way, it just really underlines it as well. Like, because look, Kadril's really successful now, but I don't believe he's set for life in the same way as, like, you know, some of these other names that we're talking about, right?
He's on the trajectory, but like Kadril does, you know, if Kadril is now making more money than Doublelift has more money than Kadril from the decade of other things that, you know, being paid as a player that Doublelift was, you know, in NA, Doublelift was doing. Kadril will probably eclipse him in the next, I don't know, 2 or 3 years. Kadril is making millions of dollars a year, but he's probably not at that level yet where he never has to work again. Kadril has other advantages in that I think he has the possibility to kind of continue to be a content creator for a long time outside of League of Legends because his scope has gotten so big. Whereas Doublelift, he's never going to make anything of himself outside of League of Legends. Like, when League of Legends dies, he's done so. That's it. So I think that when it comes to this, though, that if it's 40% of the viewership is coming through co-streams, if the co-streamers just say fucking no to taking the bag, this whole project, because they probably paid the co-streamers a few $1 million in total, all the co-streamers together. But remember that they're spending $60 million on the prize pool of this thing, plus production costs, plus the team payments. So it means that almost half their viewership could just disappear, and they still have all of the other costs associated with running this event. And that's, you know, that's a big blow. Now, obviously, the other blow is the developers. It's not like with golf, where the Saudis came in and they created Live Golf, and then they basically just spent the PGA under until they forced them to surrender effectively. They can't do that because the developers own the intellectual property. They can't just create another League of Legends league or another Counter-Strike league. They have to have approval. The developers could just say no. They could just say no to events in Saudi Arabia. They could just say no, and it would be over. The devs don't need this money. The co-streamers and the devs don't need this money, and they are the ones with the most power to stop this.
Look, never going to tell anyone like what money not to take. Like, I mean, I want to make that abundantly clear. The bigger issue for me isn't core streamers. Like, I believe those people are all morally flexible. And if you're fine with it and you've never spoke up about it before, everyone's got to set their own threshold. As we've already said, one of the really dumb thing that's happened in the esports washing era is people are creating some sort of fucking moral equivalence between gambling and Saudi Arabian money, which is like, it's just a really dumb fucking argument. But whatever, you know, like people are going to make it. That's fine. Now, I have no problem with gambling, sports betting. I have no problem with that whatsoever. As long as it's regulated and it's age gated, I don't care, right? Like, it's just not a big deal to me. But there are people out there who will absolutely tell you this is like, gambling is evil. It ruins more lives than Saudi Arabia ever could dream of. And that you see this all of the time. But like, I'm fine with it. I have set my own moral framework with which I will exist. And if people tell me I'm wrong for doing it, you're just gonna have to eat shit. So that's fine, right? Like, if you can live like that, if you can make that decision for yourself, that's fine. But you've also got to understand something. Yes, you are holding a ton of cards right now where you could absolutely do something and you are electing not to, and people are going to criticize you for that, and that's perfectly fair. But on the other aspect of that as well is, yeah, look, if you've ever even said anything about any of these fucking issues before, then you have to understand how ridiculous you look in the eyes of many people. As I said, we've done it. We've turned down millions of dollars of investment money. And like, I'm not a millionaire. Either are you a millionaire?
Nope.
I'm not a millionaire. So why can I do it? I'd like to be a millionaire. That'd be cool. But I don't want to do it on those terms. So
Also, Richard, I've never understood this whole thing because to me, this was already a core concept of how any of us ever made it in esports during the hard times, the downturn years, the years where the bubble burst. Here's what happens. This is a reality. If you want to work in esports full time, you will face years where you don't have a gig from someone or you lose your initial source of income. And what you actually have to do for real, this is literally what I had to do because we didn't take the Saudi millions, is do the exact same job, but with 3 times the effort to make the same money. Now, you might go, but I shouldn't have to. No, there's no I shouldn't. You just do it. You do it because in that scenario, the other choice was do something morally reprehensible. So, you know what, at that point in time, it's still, you still get to work in esports. You still get to have all the upside that's brilliant about it. You should have to work even harder. The real problem is, and that's actually the most disgusting part about this whole quandary, is people just don't want to ever go back down, Richard. They don't want to ever go back down to working more for less money in less glamorous circumstances, for working at a side tournament, side circuit, not the biggest event.
The trajectory must always be upwards,
absolutely.
right?
It's selfish. It is actually inherently selfish. Yeah.
Yeah. But again, I mean, look, if we're apportioning blame, unfortunately, Christopher, I think one of the areas where we absolutely do fucking differ is, for me, like, I can't see past the organizations, the MGOs, as being the people that have absolutely brought us to ruin. Tournament operators as well, to a lesser extent. But what's happening now in the space, where, these multi-gaming organizations are now having the fucking, they're making these outrageous demands of tournament operators that we must get appearance fees because that's how it works in the Saudi Arabian model. Like, fuck these people forever, man. Like, actually, fuck you. You had a license to print money between 2016 and 2019. We continued to grow during COVID, and you kept making hires. They wasted the money. Every esports organization could have had a slush fund of millions to rely upon and fall back on when times are hard, when you don't win so much. But they've simply elected not to do that. They have chosen all of this shit. We want the money, more for us, and then they turn around publicly and go, we have to do this. We employ dozens of people, Richard. If we don't take this money, we might have to make more layoffs, like all the layoffs you just made. So don't, these people are scumbags. You have to understand that. I've lost so much respect for so many people I've known for decades and been in rooms with for decades and who I've talked to politely. I got no time for any of these people anymore. The writing was on the wall. I should have seen these people for who they are. That fucking cartel that couldn't handle any competition. These aren't great thinkers or thought leaders or businessmen. They're fucking losers. They're losers. They're inept fucking losers. Because I guarantee you, if you gave me one check for $20 million and said, go build an esports organization, I'd be winning trophies inside of 3 years and I wouldn't even need a re-up. I know I could do that. So who the fuck are these losers? So... Yeah, there's no excuse for what they've done to this industry. None at all. And now they've brought us to this point. I see it as 70-80% on them.
I mean, I think that if you want to talk about people who have sent a message, I mean, look at the insane scandals that both Riot and Activision Blizzard had about treatment of women within their companies, and now they just reverse face and just support this and endorse it and take money from it. It's disgusting.
Abuse of women is different when it's culturally ingrained, Monty. You know, like don't you understand? I mean, put it this way as well. I mean, the joke is like you would have to fucking, you know, you make an argument. Who is it more culturally ingrained to? Riot Games or Saudi Arabia? It's you know, it's a marriage made in fucking heaven in a lot of ways, isn't it?
That's a pretty good one. That's good. Sophie's choice.
Yeah. You know, it's
who's influencing who? Maybe now Saudi gets worse as a result of this. I know.
Like
suddenly MBS is falling in people's faces.
Yeah, MBS is in a room with like fucking the D20, and he's going, but no, we never dream of doing that to up. I suppose. Go on then. All right. Sounds good, actually. Yeah, just degrade them for employment. You say, oh, so they're not even married to you. All right, yeah, no problem. It's crazy. It's crazy the posturing and preening that has gone on for 10 years.
I think
I'm sure I would be less repulsed by these people, as I said, if they hadn't spent a decade lecturing everybody else about their moral superiority based on their political choices, you know, and never missing an opportunity to talk about it. Never wasting an opportunity to talk about it. Because in the same way they refuse to come down financially, they also all believe they're on some upward trajectory, just in terms of sociologically speaking. You know, think about Mark Merrill and Light and all and the Becks all saying, oh, we made a video game, but it's a video game that's going to improve the world by making everyone's lives better and teaching people how to behave and interact with each other. They all think they are just destined for something greater than what they are. And unfortunately, when you combine unchecked hubris with, you know, just unfettered amounts of money, this unholy alliance is what you get. And it's like, it's really, everyone showed their ass on this, by the way. Everyone has showed their ass on this. The FGC, that fucking hounded me with death threats for fucking years because I'm a Nazi, apparently. They're all just now, Evo's got a Kadir lounge where we advertised the mega project Kadir, which certainly hasn't been built with any slave labor. By the way, did I tell you Black Lives Matter? Not those Black lives that are being forced into indentured servitude, of course. Not those Black lives. Literal corpses buried in the foundations of fucking buildings that you're going to go and occupy. That's fine, guys. That's all acceptable. That's acceptable to these people because for 5 minutes, they get to pretend that they're a fucking star. It's so gaudy. It's pathetic. Really is pathetic.
The nouveau riche.
This is what they mean when they talk about the
Richard?
banality of evil, unfortunately. Like, it actually just is. This is what the banality of evil
No,
looks
by the
like.
way, it's why I always say, it's why it's so sad that people stupidly in the West, when they don't like something in government, goes, it's fascism, it's fascism. No, you cretin. The brilliant thing about fascism is it's overt. You can see that someone is doing something truly evil because they have power and they are basically saying, watch me smash your face in with this iron gauntlet that I will rule with. What's worse is this like fucking tyranny of civility where you have to, as the IOC, not go, look, we don't give a fuck, it's sports and we're taking the money. You have to go, they align with our values. You have to like gaslight us all that you're doing the good thing by doing this. Like, that's the worst thing to me. And by the way, these people, Steve Arhansett is in no context a fascist. He is in no context someone who would support any kind of like a fucking militaristic regime like that. But he will put his name beside and alongside people who might act in a similar way, but under the umbrella, I could intentionally use that phrase, of, we're the good guy, we're the reformers, we're the progressive element. That's the part that's also really offensive to me. It's like, mate, you already got the money. You're already doing the bad thing. Do you also then have to ram it down everyone's throats that you're also sort of good for doing it? Like, or essentially their logic is by being less bad, I'm good, which is like, that's some sort of fucked up calculus as well.
Yeah.
It's just so cynical. Come on, man. Also, spoiler, I'll just put this out there. Say you're someone out there who was an outrageous exhibitionist, known for being a firebrand personality. You cannot be restrained. More than that, you never will be, thanks to the US Constitution. So you go out there and you win awards and you take shots at conservatives and Republicans and you speak about how edgy you are. You know what then, mate? Go ahead and pop off from the safety of America, where you will never be extradited and killed in a Saudi prison. Go ahead and call out the Saudi regime that now runs esports. Call out the people who run your fighting games. Let me know what you think about those people and what they would do to gay people in your country. What they would do in this analogy to a 9-year-old kid who, in theory, this wouldn't really probably happen, but in theory, a 9-year-old kid who just did dress up and wore a fucking wig could just be in like prison on death row by your logic. So you must have some incredibly frank words to tell those people. Tell you what, that's going to be a hell of a fucking speech. That'll be legit. Oh, there isn't one. You have nothing to say at all. Again, you have no morals, mate. This is fucking gross. Because here's the difference. You actually did know that if you spoke out against the Roe v. Wade ruling, nothing would happen to you. You wouldn't lose a single sponsor. You actually knew that if you implied the president is a fascist and will put everyone in prison, you'll never be put in prison, bizarrely, even though he's apparently just a fascist and puts everyone in prison. You'll never be prosecuted in any context. You'll never have anything done to your visa status, to your living situation. Nothing. No one will ever come and interrupt you, who you love, what you do in your life. But somehow you just can't muster up the stones to actually call out people on the other side of the world you, in theory, never have to interact with. Weird, that, isn't it? And also, I'll just throw this out there finally. Why is any fighting game in the Esports World Cup? You're not esports. That's just a petty fucking...
I know. Yeah.
It's just petty, but whatever. That was not really the most important thing I said there, but I can't not take the shot, Richard. I have to, you know.
Well, another thrilling episode. Hopefully you guys feel somewhat updated about the Saudis. You know, I'm sure you guys are tired of hearing about it. We're tired of talking about it, man.
The whole episode, didn't it? Like, it's even worse than I thought. Brilliant. Well, obviously he's coming up soon.
No, it is. Like, guys, when I started doing research for this episode, I was like, oh, shit, it has somehow gotten worse. It's even worse than I thought. And I already thought it was pretty bad. But this last year, with everything that's going on, it just becomes more and more indefensible that the industry continues to get involved in this. You know, wherever you want to point the fingers, there is definitely some degree of blame and also complicity on every single side of this. And the thing is, too, is that this money's going to go away eventually because it's unsustainable and it's a stupid investment.
Yeah. I mean, look, it's like I said, it's very instructive to me that everything is being channeled into mobile gaming and the quest for the Olympics, which, as I said, if people don't understand, the Saudis, for some reason, seem obsessed with controlling the Olympics. Esports gave them a great vector through which to do it because they run all the esports programs now.
Is Esports World Cup even important to them anymore now that they have literal real World Cup?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
I'll even give you an angle that I think is even more gross. If you want to say the dreaded term progress, that everything you wanted politically implemented was humanity evolving and going forwards, and one day we'll be in the stars if we do all this shit. Let me just put this out there. One of the most famous fucking grounds for political protest was the Olympics, fist in the air, people refusing to participate, people calling it out. I actually will make a prediction for you. Now the Olympics will regress and become something where that can't even happen anymore. And not only that, I don't even think the modern athlete would even think to do that. I think the modern athlete has been so enamored with money and fame and this status and sponsorship that they won't even consider in their own mind doing a protest like that. So that's actually not progress. You've actually almost gone back in time 200 years on that.
Yeah. I mean, look, it's like we saw with Qatar. We were told all of these wonderful things are going to happen, that it was going to be just a normal World Cup.
Yeah.
The FIFA signed a $400 million sponsorship deal with Budweiser, which Qatar immediately reneged on. They said we'd sell beer, only non-alcoholic, of course. That they tanked that. I don't know. I can't even imagine what the internal dialogue must have been around that. We were told everybody was welcome, and yet people were being arrested for carrying anything that looked like a rainbow. By the way, this happened to some, fans that they weren't even making a statement about LGBT. Like there was a Brazilian fan. It was just, I think it was like his state flag happened to be that of a rainbow in Brazil. Arrested, of course. We were told, by the way, that people like Harry Kane and all these other people would be able to wear the rainbow armband.
With the England shirt, mate. Remember that? They did it for one game, didn't they? Didn't they do one game or something?
But then FIFA turned around and said, if you do it, you will be booked. You will have to tank a yellow card for the tournament. And so on the basis of a yellow card, everyone pussied the fuck out.
Yeah, that's all it
but
was.
hey, guys, don't worry. We'll still take a knee. We'll still take a knee because Black Lives Matter, even though the stadiums we are nailing on was built on the labour of black indentured servitude, African indentured servitude, and there are probably dead people in the foundations, as proven by multiple reports. So we're just gonna tank all of that, guys. Don't worry. So we have seen what moral cowardice looks like in the face of like being tested for money. We've seen it over and over and over and over again. And so yeah, absolutely. Don't think this is going to be any different. And look, Christopher's on the money because once we get to a point where Saudi Arabia wants their teams in their football league to be allowed in the Champions League, which has obviously solely been the preserve of European teams. They have incredibly won a bid for the World Cup. They are hosting more and more tournaments that are bigger and bigger. They own the UFC. They're going to own golf in its entirety. They're increasingly making inroads into Formula One. What's going to be left? And by the way, when you compare all of that to this tiny little corner of esports, how much longer do you think they're really going to give a fuck?
Well, and it's also what Thorin said too, which is that once they have the monopoly and they've killed all their competitors, they're not going to make it this big thing anymore. Like those days will be over. It will actually, at that point in time, it will actually shrink to being sustainable for the Saudis.
Another reason why I cannot forgive what the MGOs did, because as somebody that worked at PGL and was privy to all of the fuckery that they were doing, where they were basically like, we're just going to stop, we will starve out your tournament unless we get an appearance fee for our attendance. It's like, okay, so what happens in a world where the Saudis have gone, but your malevolence has killed another tournament operator that we'd now be relying on in the scene? They would burn it all down just to have more money now. It's not even to rule over the ashes. They wouldn't be ruling shit. They would burn it all down now. It's like basically like they're in a fallout shelter. If you open the door, all the radiation's going to get in and kill everyone. But someone has left a pile of gold outside of the fallout shelter. They would open the door, Monty. They'd kill everyone inside, even though gold has no value in whatever apocalyptic society exists outside of that door. The likes of Victor Goosens and the Steve Arnsets and the Jack Etiennes and all these other people, they would open the fucking door and kill everyone. Like, I can't operate in a space where I know that to be true, but I have to because it's esports and everything's fucking stupid.
By the way, what kills me is that one of the most boring things about esports itself, by the way, I'm sure you've all found this, is when you've worked in other games or you know more about the history, you see the trend playing out the exact same way with the same mechanisms, and you go, well, this is going to happen. And the idiot from the one esport in his little echo chamber goes, well, there's no proof. How do you know that? Well, it's even worse when you know what happened in other sports. Like the idea that you're going to, as pissy little, not even remember, we say esports like it's an umbrella term. The people in League of Legends are not the people in Rocket League are not the people in Dota. Like, it's different, disparate groups. The idea that even if you banded together, you're going to influence the Saudis in a way that FIFA cannot, in a way that fucking golf cannot, in a way that with massive prize fighting that can get millions of dollar gates, they can't influence them. But you're going to do it by going, hey, but I want to wear the little flag on the... Shut the fuck up, dickhead. Doesn't even make sense. And the giveaway, this is why Monty's been able to guess it the whole way. He's not Nostradamus. He's going off quite obvious steps that they're doing. The giveaway that they're going to do this in esports, in fact, in League of Legends, to make it a Riot Games example, is that they went out of their way, Monty, in a game that is only top teams from Europe to relabel the region Europe, Middle East, and Africa. That there are no Middle Eastern teams that are top teams. There are no fucking African teams that I'm even aware exist, bro. So they did that intentionally so that then it is, you don't have the same conversation, Monty, of like, well, how could a Saudi team be in the European Champions League? Like, because it just will be the Champions League, and you don't even need to do that in League. LEC just will be a thing that has the Middle Eastern team in. So welcome Falcons, welcome whoever else. They'll all be in eventually, mate. It's just obvious. The point is, as we see in this episode, this is why there'll be future episodes. They're just doing the tiptoe approach. They're just gradually stepping up to the line, getting scared away one step, stepping up a little bit more, and then eventually they just go wherever they need to go on the line. Just suddenly is way over here.
Yeah.
Depressing. But that'll do it for this show, guys. I'm sure we'll have another check-in, depending on if we get Olympics news at some point or even next year, to say how somehow the human rights abuses have gotten even worse in Saudi Arabia when everyone seems to be saying they're getting better for some reason. You'll notice that the people who say it gets better have a financial interest in saying it's getting better. And the people like the human rights watch groups, they don't say that. Weird. Very weird. All right, guys. That'll do it for tonight. We'll see you in a couple weeks. Esports till end to est.